introduction of guests.
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and welcome back to all of my colleagues to the legislature again today. A little brisk out there today, as I'm sure the questions and debate will be as always in here, Mr. Speaker. And all those who are tuned in at home, I would like to say welcome as well. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to bring to the attention of all Islanders that the Charlottetown Christmas Festival is set to begin. It will run this year from November 20th to December 13th. It's a presentation by Discover Charlottetown. It will be a little bit different this year, Mr. Speaker, but all of the nuggets that we've enjoyed will be on display in many public events, outdoor music and entertainment, and like many things a little bit different this year in terms of COVID and protocols, but a good reason to come to Charlottetown and to celebrate the beginning of the Christmas season, which seems to be coming far too quickly, Mr. Speaker, for some. I want to give a shout out also, Mr. Speaker, to all the teachers in our province. I know that parent-teacher interviews are going to take place over the next 48 hours or so, Mr. Speaker, and all that has occurred in this province to get our students and teachers and professionals back into school safely, Mr. Speaker. All that has gone into that has been a tremendous effort, and a lot of people deserve credit. And just a shout out to the teachers who have gone above and beyond to keep that important line of communication open between parents and guardians about the students in this province. And sometimes it's been online, sometimes it's been on the phone. There will be occasion to do so in person, like always with parent-teacher this time, but just really important to point that out, Mr. Speaker. There's been some talk, Mr. Speaker, about pies in this legislature the last couple of days, of course, and I just wanted to make Islanders aware, although most know this already, but the run on meat pies has begun at Close Store in Hampshire, Mr. Speaker, and thousands of meat pies are produced and sold by Norman Clow and this wonderful staff at Close Store, Mr. Speaker, and you got to get on a list, and there are going to be a couple of weeks' time where you're only going to be allowed in 2 at a time because it's a very popular place for meat pies. So I would encourage you to get your name on the list and get your order in because they go fast and they're very popular. And Mr. Speaker, of course, in the wonderful riding of District 15, Mr. Speaker, which I'm very honored to represent, so I should get that in as well. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that in the last week or so, young Islanders have started to receive their books through the new partnership with the Imagination Library delivered through the PEI Literacy Alliance, Mr. Speaker. A wonderful initiative that was first brought to my attention by my friend, the Senator Diane Griffin, Mr. Speaker, who which seems like a lifetime ago before COVID, came into my office and sat down and talked about this initiative, and she went about getting the PEI Literacy Alliance involved, and it's taken maybe a little bit longer than we thought, Mr. Speaker, but now in beginning this week that young Islanders who are enrolled in this program are receiving an age-appropriate book in the mail free of charge until their 5th birthday, Mr. Speaker. Just a wonderful initiative that was first started by country music legend Dolly Parton, and it bridges who bridges all generations and is quick to offer support, Mr. Speaker. So it's been an overwhelming response. Ginny and Amanda from the Literacy Alliance had the full roster in the first 24 hours and have since increased the capacity in the program. We'll continue to do everything we can to support them in growing this program, Mr. Speaker, and bringing books into the homes of all Islanders, Mr. Speaker. And what a great gift we can give our children is a good book to call their own. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to thank everyone who's made that initiative happen. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. There are a couple of organisations that are now accepting submissions for this year's award ceremonies. One is Music PEI, fantastic organisation that supports musicians across this province, the thousands of people who provide musical entertainment for Islanders, and a great group of people. So if you know somebody who you feel is deserving of a Music PEI award, please come forward and nominate them. The other organisation who has open nominations is the PEI Senior Islander of the Year, and each year they nominate three people are designated as Seniors of the Year. So again, if you know somebody who's a senior who you feel is worthy of that designation, come forward and nominate them, please. A couple of other people I'd like to mention. Luke Ignace, who I'm sure many in this house are aware of. Luke's an extraordinary young man. He's originally from the Bahamas, now living on Prince Edward Island, and he's in the process of creating a non-profit organization called Island to Island. One island being the Bahamas, the other being Prince Edward Island, of course, and he's doing extraordinary things to help particularly the folks down in the Bahamas in the recovery to Dorian, where they were, I know it hit PEI hard, but the Bahamas were absolutely devastated. And Luke's doing extraordinary work there, and I just want people to know that they're accepting donations. I think today is the last day, between 4 and 8 p.m. at their warehouse on Longworth Avenue. It's right next to Pressed for Time. So if any Islanders out there have things they would like to donate to that very worthy cause, please come forward and do that. And finally, Mr. Speaker, it's my daughter's 32nd birthday today. So happy birthday, Kate, in Montreal. I haven't seen her for almost a year now, so hoping to get up there at some point and visit her and our little grandson, but that may have to wait for a while. Anyway, happy birthday to you, Kate. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and once again, it's certainly a privilege to rise here today. I'd also like to say hello to everyone back in the wonderful district of Evangeline Musquesh. And I never had the opportunity at this session to say hi to my mother-in-law, Mary Morris, who watches the proceedings most of the times, and I hope she's watching this afternoon. Mr. Speaker, I, as well as the Premier, would like to also thank the teachers, all staff in our schools, but a special thank you to school bus drivers. I dropped off 2 of my grandkids this morning at the school bus stop, and you know, they whipped their masks on before they got out of the vehicle, and I looked at the bus driver, and he opened the door and yelled, "Hello, Sonny," and I waved back. I'm not quite sure who he was because it was too far away, and my eyes are getting a little with glasses on, but I said hello back at him. I used to drive a bus when I was younger as a casual bus driver, and it's a pretty responsible job, and my hats go off to them, and kudos to all school bus drivers for keeping our children safe. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow, November 12th, from 10 to 11:30, UPEI will be holding a virtual fall open house. This is being designed to give prospective students a virtual campus tour and also allows them to meet recruiting reps and find out about programs offered at the university. While folks may not be able to view the university in person, this will allow them to see the possibility and the opportunities at UPEI. Also, Mr. Speaker, I too would like to mention, as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition said, the deadline for the Seniors Island Awards is December 16th, and as we all know, there are many, many, many deserving seniors out there for things they've done to lay the pathwork for us and for us to sit in this legislature here today. So anybody that feels a senior is deserving of this award, nominate them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise in the House today and welcome back all of my colleagues for what I'm sure will be another productive day. I'd like to say hello to everyone who is watching at home, and in particular, Mr. Speaker, to my mother. It is her birthday today, and I would like to acknowledge that. I would have loved to have spent the day with her, but I'm very fortunate to be here today. We did have a birthday party for her on the weekend, but due to COVID restrictions, we couldn't invite most of her friends. So if we didn't invite you, please don't take it personally, but give her a call today and wish her a happy birthday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise here today. I'd like to say hi to everybody out in Mermaid Stratford that's watching today, and I would like to just recognize that it's actually a really exciting time in Stratford because we've now got a hardware store. We've got the Kinlock Home Hardware that opened, and if anybody's familiar with the Stratford area, we always had Southport Home Centre, and that was one of the first places that I worked once I was eligible to work. And a hardware store in a community is a very special place because you go there to meet your neighbors. The people that work there know everything pretty much that you're doing, whether it's building a shed, building a house, and really Southport Home Centre, I think, changed the landscape of Stratford, an area, because they pretty much helped build most of the houses over there. They were open for such a long period of time. So it's been missed, and when I worked there, it was Joe Corcoran that owned it. And what was funny was, if you'll indulge me, there's initiation that some of the older contractors used to do when you worked there. So you could be sent for a steam bucket. And if you're not familiar with what a steam bucket is, it doesn't exist, but that didn't stop you from rushing all around the store to try to help that customer because it was all about customer service. Or a left-handed monkey wrench. And so those are some really good times that I remember at Southport Home Center. But first and foremost, the staff that used to be there that I worked with are still working hard in the community and around the community. And I'm just excited that we have that community space open again. And congratulations to Peter Smith and Dwayne McDonald for opening up that great location. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Cornwall Middlebanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to, yesterday, or today in the news, I guess, but yesterday really, the announcement to my riding in Cornwall Meadowbank of the RCMP Maypoint detachment is moving out there, and I just wanted to shout out to Jennifer Ebert and Mayor McCourt and Dean Lewis and CEO Kevin Cody and the councillors and of course the federal government. But I can remember, Mr. Speaker, this has been on and off for, it's got to be over 20 years, and it's finally happening, and it's all a tribute to the arterial highway, I think, is really what has done this. So it's always nice to have a presence of the RCMP in your community, and we'll open our arms up for them and appreciate them coming to Cornwall. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, certainly a pleasure for me to rise today in the House and say hello to all my constituents, family and friends in District 6, Stratford-Keppoch. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to say hello to my mom at Beech Grove Home and the incredible staff that work in that facility caring for our seniors, and also to all my girlfriends at St. John House. I know they're regularly tuning in, and I just want to say hello and again thank them for their generosity in the recent food drive. Mr. Speaker, I picked up on something last night on social media, and I just wanted to share it quickly with my colleagues here today. So this was the thread that I read last night, and I thought it was very pertinent. So verbatim, I was on the phone with a customer service representative today. The woman on the other end asked for my billing address. She said, "An island, that's so nice." And we launched into talking about COVID. She asked how many cases we currently have. I said 3. She was silent. She was calling from California. They had over 8,000 new cases and 32 deaths in that day alone. In total, they have surpassed 1 million cases since the pandemic began. Here, that would mean every single islander would have had COVID already, 6 times. We talked for a while, and we went to hang up. I said, "Take care." She got slightly emotional before she said, "You too." I've never deeply cared for a service rep I met over the phone, but I couldn't help worry that tomorrow she would be part of a new 8,000 or 32. I don't think people realize the magnitude of our luck, the magnitude of what we have been able to accomplish to date. PEI, we are being asked to wear a mask. Please, please, just do it. The world is yearning for what we have here. Do not chance this. #MaskUp, and I want to thank Alyssa McKinnon for giving me the permission to share this with my colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Great, I have to go after that. Well done. No. Just wanted to say a special hello to everybody in District 14 out there today, and just wanted to let people know that at PE Home, they usually have an annual Residents Council Christmas tea and sale. And obviously with COVID restrictions and the pressures on our long-term care and facilities, they have to make changes. But I want to let our community know that PE Home is doing a silent auction, and that's starting November 28th to December 4th, and they're asking for donations and bake sales. If any time ever in the history of Prince Edward Island we can help the people living in long-term care facilities and areas like this, I think it's this year. So I want to thank the group of fitness enthusiasts in my world that are helping out with that. So all proceeds will go to the residential council there for activities. So saying hello to everybody at PE Home. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just wanted to bring some acknowledgements. Mr.
Mr. Speaker, the management team of ADL yesterday did their, they went to on-farm to participate. So the CEO, Chad Mann, went to, when I called him yesterday, he was milking cows, Mr. Speaker, and that's what ADL is all about. It's cooperative owned, and their staff and employees really get the feel of what dairy farming is all about. And that's, just wanted to acknowledge the team of ADL. And Mr. Speaker, 4-H is back. Mr. Speaker, 4-H on the island started up last month. Mr. Speaker, it's definitely different than most years, but I'm such a huge advocate of 4-H. I grew up through the 4-H program, and I hope the kids can have a great experience even through this year, Mr. Speaker. We want to thank the volunteers that help out with that. And to my district, beautiful Stanhope Marshfield, Mr. Speaker, I want to give acknowledgement to Mr. Doug McCollum, Mr. Speaker. Doug, I ran into him last week, and he was telling me he has this old cow that kicked him for the last time, he said, Mr. Speaker. He said, I wanted to do something good with her, so he donated all the meat from this cow, Mr. Speaker, to the food bank, Mr. Speaker. So I want to give a shout out to Doug for a very noble thing, and not so well for the cow, but Mr. Speaker, Doug did well. So thank you.
Honourable members, the member for Charlottetown Belvedere rose on a point of order, noting that all members should be referring to each other by district or portfolios, not by he or she or by name. I will remind all members to refer to each other by portfolio or district in the chamber, which can help in keeping the debate in the chamber from becoming too personal. I will also remind all honourable members that they should address the chair in their remarks and not the House. I do not find the reference to the members using pronouns to be out of order, as it can help with the flow of the debate in the chamber, but that all remarks toward other members should be respectful. It is out of order to use language or words offensive towards the House or any member. I hope these serves to clarify this matter. Thank you. Member statements. The honourable member for Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I recently had the opportunity to make a gift to Lights for Life in support of the Prince County Hospital Foundation. Since 1995, Lights for Life has been an important part of the PEI community, a vital fundraiser for the Prince County Hospital, and an opportunity to remember and honor your loved ones during the holiday season. This year, respecting the current restrictions for large gatherings, the Prince County Hospital Foundation will be unable to have their usual community event. They have, however, created a new way to bring the celebration to life while ensuring everyone can safely enjoy the lights, the music, and the experience of Lights for Life. Starting December 2nd and running until December 31st, the lights at Prince County Hospital will come on nightly at 5:30 as usual. New this year, though, you will be able to view the full Lights for Life show set to music from the comfort of your car at 7 p.m. and again at 8 p.m. each of those nights. You can bring your whole family, tune in on the radio, and enjoy the show from the Prince County Hospital parking lot from the warmth and comfort of your car. You can also dedicate a light or display in honor or in memory of a loved one or someone that you have appreciated. It is my honor to be able to dedicate a light this year in this year's display in memory of my grandmother, Pat Altas. All gifts to Lights for Life support the purchase of much-needed medical equipment for patients at the Prince County Hospital. This year, the PCH Foundation has been working to raise funds for items such as cardiac monitors, birthing beds, a blood count analyzer, and much more. Donations made before November 21st will be included in the annual Lights for Life dedication book that will be available after December 3rd at the Prince County Hospital. Donations can be made at pchcare.com or at the foundation office in the hospital lobby. As they say at the PCH Foundation, even a little light can mean a lot. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last sitting of this House, we heard about $55 million in infrastructure spending, with the lion's share going to paving roads. It's true that Islanders love their roads and appreciate when work is done to them, so it was a welcome announcement from government. To defend the expenditure on roads, the Minister of Finance pointed to the requirement of shovel-ready projects to qualify for the funding. But to be shovel-ready, we need a government that will be committed to vision, one that has the foresight to plan in advance. Without that, we risk constantly playing catch-up on our infrastructure needs, and that has a direct impact on our communities. I represent a district that has never had adequate capacity within its school system. Currently, according to the enrollment numbers tabled by the Minister, Charlottetown Rural High School is at 120% capacity. That's 189 students more than the school's capacity. This issue is only growing and continuing to grow, especially with the rate that the town of Stratford is growing. In fact, Stratford is the fastest growing community in Atlantic Canada. So what does this mean for our students? By the time this government gets around to opening the new high school in Stratford, Charlottetown Rural High School is estimated to being 397 students over capacity. This is not a surprise. These numbers have been around for years. Having a vision for the island includes looking ahead by more than a year to ensure that you are putting plans in place to meet the needs of Islanders, not just for tomorrow, but for 5, 10, and 20 years down the road. Planning for the infrastructure we need, at the very least, for the next 5 years should be priority, so that when we have the opportunity to leapfrog a capital project, we can do more than just pave the driveway to that building. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown Belvedere and the opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Renting in PEI, a guide for tenants, is a new resource available online and as a printed booklet published by the Community Legal Information Association. This guide empowers renters and landlords through plain language to know their rights and responsibilities. The guide is available online at rentingpei.ca in English, French, Mandarin, and Arabic, and is also being distributed to libraries and community partners across the province. This guide and the associated online Tenant Support Centre assist tenants on PEI by providing legal information, referrals, as well as support during the rental hearing process. It is a project of the Community Legal Information Association funded by the PEI provincial government. CLEA also delivers workshops on tenants' rights and responsibilities, with all of these services being provided free of charge to the public. Congratulations and a thank you to the whole team at the Community Legal Information Association who do exactly what they say, empowering through knowledge. I also want to acknowledge the government for providing the funding that allows great projects like this to become reality. It also speaks to the complexity and challenges Islanders face because of the Rental of Residential Property Act, the law that applies to most residential tenants in PEI. That legislation is long overdue for updating to not only make it more accessible and relevant, but to address systemic issues and challenges for both tenants and landlords in the rental relationship. The legislation has been drafted, gone to public consultation, and was due to be tabled in the House this past spring, but now it is unlikely we will see it until the fall of 2021. When the government does not make an issue like housing a priority at the executive level, then resources are not provided to ensure critical legislation and behind-the-scenes data and research are in place. The responsibility to paper over the gaps with resources like the Tenant Support Centre and the Renting in PEI Guide get downloaded to the community sector, who are themselves underfunded and under-resourced. I know this guide will be invaluable to Islanders, and I encourage all tenants to access it in print or online. It is the most valuable resource they have available to them at this time, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Questions by members, starting with response to questions taken as notice. The Honorable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Response to questions from the Honourable Leader of the Third Party from yesterday about the Kettle campaign. The PEI Liquor Commission is pleased to continue their partnership with the Salvation Army for their annual Kettle campaign. At the Salvation Army's request, it was agreed that the Oak Tree store in Charlottetown, the Granville store in Summerside would participate. However, the Salvation Army is waiting for the freestanding tip-tap units, which the Charlottetown branch had proposed to the Commission instead of the kettles, and subsequently the Summerside branch agreed to. If the Salvation Army is able to obtain additional tip-tap units, the Commission will gladly place those in other liquor stores of their choosing, meaning the Salvation Army. The PEI-LCC has stopped all monthly canisters for various organizations due to COVID-19. The PEI-LCC is discouraging, like many other retailers across the province, payments with cash if another means is available. As a result of the measures put in place by PEI-LCC locations, there is now limited counter space in place to place cans due to the plexiglass barriers put in place at the beginning of the pandemic, and sufficient space must be allowed within the store to ensure proper physical distancing can be maintained for the safety of owners within their stores. PEI-LCC will participate in this campaign, although in a different format from previous years, as we continue to abide by the public health measures put in place by the CPHO. The Salvation Army will also be a recipient of the PEI-LCC Gift of Giving campaign this year to further our support of their organization and the work that they do. In discussions with the Salvation Army, both within Charlottetown and Summerside, they had advised of a December 1st start date for this campaign, and that their freestanding touchless tip-tap units will be set up in the 2 participating PEI-LCC stores by that date. And I encourage all members, if you're not familiar with TipTap, to check it out online. I think it will be the way we all donate in the future, especially at retail locations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change, and Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a follow-up to questions from the member of Charlottetown Belvedere yesterday, I would like to provide the following information. As per Section 24 of the CADC bylaws, the General Manager of CADC reports to the Board. In February 2018, Cabinet appointed an interim Board of Deputy Ministers and the CAOs of Charlottetown and Stratford. This board provided direction to the General Manager and approval of projects until the new board was appointed. The Honourable Member made reference to a document requested under Freedom of Information, which I have provided to her yesterday. This email had a list of project updates. I'm happy to table this document later in the House. In addition to the project updates in this email, CADC is now managing a construction of a bioaccelerator building in the Biocommons. Lastly, I will table the Engage PEI listing, which lists the skills and attributes we are looking for in the candidates. Government's representatives, as well as those from Charlottetown and Stratford, come from a wide range of backgrounds, both from an employment and community involvement standpoint, and bring a substantial amount of experience and a very broad perspective relating to arts, culture, housing, and well-being. I am pleased to see this board is balanced and diverse, and welcome the newly appointed members. I look forward to the great work they will help us accomplish. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now for our first question, I'll call on the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. A critical part of PEI's economic strength and development, and certainly part of this island's post-COVID economic recovery, will be making sure that housing is available and affordable to all islanders. The Provincial Housing Action Plan developed by the previous administration was adopted by this government. One of the priority areas for immediate action was to establish a Cabinet Committee on Housing consisting of Minister of Finance, Family, Human Services, Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, and Community, Land and Environment, to lead this government's approach to the supply of affordable housing, of market development, analysis and innovation. A question to the Premier. What is the status of this Cabinet Committee?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank the Honourable Member, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for the question, and I would say his caucus's continued not just interest, but drive to help us deal with this critical issue, Mr. Speaker. A lot of the departments that the honourable member outlined, Mr. Speaker, are no longer in existence because they are within the scope of the former government. Throughout my short time here in government, Mr. Speaker, I have had the tremendous leadership of the Minister of Social Development and Housing, who has made record investments in housing in this province, Mr. Speaker. I feel we've made some significant strides, Mr. Speaker, in addressing the challenge with housing in this province. But I'm also the first to recognize, Mr. Speaker, that we still have a long ways to go. I think you'll see some announcements when we table our capital budget, Mr. Speaker, about our interest and our initiative to continue to address this challenge, Mr. Speaker. And I just encourage all members to continue to support our government as we work towards solving this important crisis for Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And yes, indeed, our caucus is very interested in this, and we've been driving for this for some time. And it's as well that somebody's driving, because the government certainly doesn't seem to be. Another one of the priority areas for immediate action was to establish a housing hub led by a special advisor and consisting of members of government, community organisations and municipalities to implement the Housing Action Plan, to report on progress, monitor market trends and provide support to housing partners. The original special advisor for housing and infrastructure, of course, was Clifford Lee, but he's long gone. He's now selling real estate, finally doing something in housing. It's clear that there is no coordinated responsibility or any sense of urgency in this government on housing. A question for the Premier. If you don't have any executive with responsibility after over 18 months in government, when will you finally admit that you don't really have any plan to address the housing crisis at all?
Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I give the honourable leader great praise for his comment, Mr. Speaker. It made me chuckle. But what also made me chuckle, Mr. Speaker, is for 18 months they complained about having a special housing advisor there, Mr. Speaker, and they weren't happy until he was fired. And now they're wondering, Mr. Speaker, why we don't have one. Mr. Speaker, my issue is this. We're trying to solve the housing crisis through making investments, Mr. Speaker. One of the things that we have done in 18 months here is made record investments in housing, Mr. Speaker. Record investments, Mr. Speaker. Following up on the provincial government previous, Mr. Speaker, who made record investments, Mr. Speaker, not because it's political, because we have to do it, Mr. Speaker. And that's what we're doing, Mr. Speaker. You can worry about committees, you can worry about advisors. I got a Minister of Social Development and Housing, Mr. Speaker, who wakes up every day trying to solve the problem, Mr. Speaker, and he's doing a heck of a job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I mean, of course, we would be happy to have people in that position if they were actually doing the job that they were paid to do. Earlier this fall, I had the chance to meet with Ulnaway, and during that meeting, they expressed a number of concerns about housing, including substandard housing and the need for increased housing investment both on and off reserve here on Prince Edward Island. In other provinces, such as British Columbia, they have stepped up to ensure that Aboriginal people have access to affordable, quality housing. A question to the Premier. What specific steps are you taking to improve housing for Aboriginal people living here on Prince Edward Island?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable leader for the question. It is a good question, Mr. Speaker. I believe that we have developed a very, very strong and unique partnership and relationship with our First Nations here, Mr. Speaker. And we talk about many things to move the First Nations people of this province forward, Mr. Speaker, housing being one of them, Mr. Speaker. Look, we work with all groups, all individuals who want to put this forward, Mr. Speaker. That's what we do. Through the Social Development and Housing Department. I'm sure the Minister will be able to address many of the issues, Mr. Speaker, and the challenges and the success that he's been able to have, Mr. Speaker, in this regard through his department, through many initiatives, Mr. Speaker. And look, we're working really, really hard, Mr. Speaker. We have seen success here, Mr. Speaker. We've had success. We have work to do. There's absolutely no question about that, Mr. Speaker. I don't think it's out of the realm of expectation for any islander to expect to have a roof over their head, Mr. Speaker, at an affordable rate, Mr. Speaker, and we're working really, really hard as a government to try to provide that, Mr. Speaker, with all groups, associations and levels of government who want to work with us, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And you know, we need to make no mistake, we're in a housing crisis here on Prince Edward Island, as the Premier has admitted in some of his answers. And I hear from young people all over the province who, you know, dream of owning a home here, but those dreams are crushed because there's no way that they can come forward with the amount of money for a down payment. I hear from people in Charlottetown here who simply cannot find an apartment, let alone find one that they can afford. So how can we expect to attract the doctors and the nurses and the other health professionals that we so desperately need to come here in this housing crisis if there's no housing available for them? I know this is a completely complex issue, I understand that, but Islanders simply cannot wait for a government to step in and do something, anything in fact. Housing is a human right, and this government is failing Islanders, no matter how strongly the Premier stands up and says that his minister responsible for housing is doing a great job. We are failing Islanders. A question to the Premier. Government responded to the COVID pandemic really quickly and appropriately to keep Islanders safe. We need to do exactly the same thing on the housing file. Will you finally commit to doing something about the housing crisis here on Prince Edward Island?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would say that the answer to addressing the housing situation crisis, whatever you want to call it in this province, Mr. Speaker, is to build more housing, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly what we're doing. I think in the last 15 years, Mr. Speaker, we've seen growth through immigration and other population measures, Mr. Speaker, where we focus too much of our efforts as a province to bring people here without actually providing the necessary infrastructure and growth, housing, etc., Mr. Speaker, and since then we've been playing catch-up, Mr. Speaker. There's no question about that. I've been in the job for 18 months, Mr. Speaker, and we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars to invest, Mr. Speaker, in housing. We can't build them fast enough, Mr. Speaker. I understand that. But we're doing everything we can, Mr. Speaker. We've addressed it considerably. We've built hundreds of units, not just in Charlottetown, not just in Summerside, but in Alberton and Georgetown and every place in between, Mr. Speaker. And we're working at breakneck speed to answer, Mr. Speaker, the needs that Islanders have. But, Mr. Speaker, we're 15 years behind and we're trying to play catch-up, and it's a difficult file, Mr. Speaker, I'm the first to say. But we're doing everything we can, and we're going to do even more, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member from Summerside, Wilmot, and the Opposition Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A critical aspect of the economy functioning successfully involves people having disposable income. No more than 25% of your income should be going to housing, but I hear from people all the time who are spending much more than that on their rent and mortgage. I can appreciate that vacancy rates may have gotten marginally better, but the cost of housing, rent, has gone up in this province. Telling people to spend locally is a moot point when they don't have anything to spend. We either need to bring the cost of housing down or wages need to go up. Getting serious on the economy means getting serious on the housing market. Question to the Premier. How are people supposed to put money back in the economy if they can't even afford their rent?
Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've continued to say in here, that we're working at an incredible pace to try to address these needs, which we are, quite honestly, 15 years behind playing catch-up on. There's absolutely no question about it. Mr. Speaker, I think it depends on where you live in this province when you base the rent. It's certainly in our urban areas for sure. I think it's the cost of living has increased considerably for sure. I think that's a challenge, Mr. Speaker, 100%. I understand that and I respect that, Mr. Speaker. Through our voucher program, our mobile voucher program, and other initiatives that we put forward, Mr. Speaker, we're trying to do everything we can to assist those who need it, Mr. Speaker. But look, absolutely, there's a challenge here that we're trying to address, Mr. Speaker. And as I've been saying here for a few minutes now, we're 15 years behind playing catch-up, Mr. Speaker, but we're making good gains, but we need to make more. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree that government is investing in housing, and I'm happy to see that, but that's only one part of this, Mr. Speaker. It's incredibly important. The cost of housing has gone up substantially in Summerside, and people are struggling to live. The rent-ups are not going to cut it for people who have mortgages to pay. I've asked the Premier about his plan for economic recovery, and he was reluctant to take ownership in creating the plan, which I find concerning. The Premier needs to set the foundation for a successful economic recovery, and deciding what part of that recovery, what will be part of that recovery, is a key role for him. We have seen two summary reports from the Premier's economic Recovery Council, and neither of them address housing. Question to the Minister of Social Development and Housing. Your government says it's taking this seriously. Did you raise that as a concern to the Premier that no one was appointed to this council to speak to the housing needs?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think, when you look at the membership of the committee, we have representation from right across the island sectors. There's going to be input from these members with regard to housing. I would like to go back, though, Mr. Speaker, just to follow up on a couple of comments in the great answers, responses that the Premier has given. Yes, when we came to power back in, to government back in 2019, I have to say we inherited a bit of a mess with regard to housing. You look...
A big mess.
A big mess. Thank you, sir. What we have done is we have added 15 million, Mr. Speaker, in the operating budget and the capital budget to housing. There will be, I'm sure, I'll just leave it at this. We will have another capital budget that will be tabled shortly, and we'll take her from there. But thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister says that we will be seeing housing addressed even though no one is appointed, but 2 reports have come forward. Housing isn't even mentioned at all. Housing prices have gone up almost 20% in just 1 year, but wages have barely increased at all on PEI. We once had a value proposition as an affordable place to live and work, and that's just simply not the case anymore. And in fact, government policy is actively making that less true. For more and more young people, Mr. Speaker, dreams of home ownership and starting a family are becoming all but impossible. A question to the Premier: how can government attract people to live and work here if the people who live here now are struggling to afford it?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I will point out that for the 4th or 5th year in a row, I believe that we've led the country in per capita population growth, so there must be a reason they're coming here, Mr. Speaker. And it's not the doom and gloom that gets painted over here each and every day from the opposition party, Mr. Speaker. Most people in PEI are very happy with Prince Edward Island, happy how well we've done through the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, that we've led the country and perhaps the world, Mr. Speaker, in our response. But the doom and gloom that gets cast here some days makes me wonder how some of us have the courage to get out of bed some days to face it, Mr. Speaker. But having said all of that, Mr. Speaker, I don't know the full background of my honourable colleague from Summerside Wilmot, Mr. Speaker, in terms of her background and what she has done in her professional career, Mr. Speaker. But in the quick glance I gave to her biography, it didn't say anything about her being an expert in housing. But I know she likes housing, Mr. Speaker. She doesn't have to come from that to care about housing, Mr. Speaker. And the 40-some people that we have on our committee who are islanders who care from tip to tip, Mr. Speaker, just because they may not represent one particular area doesn't mean they do not care about Prince Edward Island as a whole and all of the things we need to do to improve it, Mr. Speaker. So I would just caution the member to say that because maybe somebody doesn't have a housing next to their name doesn't mean that they do not care about it, Mr. Speaker. I think just the opposite. As I said in previous question periods, Mr. Speaker, that regardless of whether you're Ray Keenan from a potato farmer from the east, Mr. Speaker, or Darren Mitchell from Trout River, Mr. Speaker, each and every one of them come forward and said we need a basic income, Mr. Speaker, for Prince Edward Island. So it doesn't matter where you come from or what you do, Mr. Speaker, it's what you're all about, and Islanders care about each other, and we all do in here, and we should. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Premier, you can say that all you want, but housing was not in that report. Tuesday night, we were fortunate to have advocates out here on the front lawn at the legislature sharing their stories with us. We heard just how difficult it is to access addictions and mental health services on PEI. And we heard from one brave gentleman who shared his story of trying to do this while also being homeless. Being homeless adds even more hurdles, abuse, and lack of respect to his journey in getting help. Question to the Minister of Health. I'm aware that you announced more housing is being built next year under the mental health campus, but it's getting cold and these units will not be ready by the time the snow flies. What additional housing will you provide this winter for those struggling with addictions?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, there was a lot of rumours going around and misinformation previously, too, about Deacon House and that it was closing. That was completely incorrect. I don't know where it came from, but Deacon House continues to operate. Mr. Speaker, that's the unfortunate thing right now, that there's a lot of misinformation out there about what services are available and what government and NGOs, in fact, are doing. We've got a great relationship with the Canadian Mental Health Association and some of the structured housing that they're providing. So, Mr. Speaker, if there's specific cases, if there's specific concerns, please bring them to me. But I feel very strongly that the services that are in place right now are doing well. Can we do better? Yeah, we can always do better, and we'll strive to do better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That didn't really answer the question, so I'm going to take that as there's nothing new happening this winter. Imagine for a moment that after we left this legislature today, you had no house to go home to. Imagine walking out of here, going to potentially pick up your children, pick up your partner, and not having anywhere to take them. You may have a friend's couch that you can sleep on. Maybe there's a shelter you could go for the night, if you don't have children, because there's nowhere to take your children for the night. Although, imagine the stress and shame that you would be feeling right now. In the past 2 weeks, I've had 2 constituents reach out to me who have been recovering alcoholics for years, but the lack of housing and near homelessness that they are currently facing has sadly pushed them to start using again. That is 2 true accounts. Question to the Minister of Health. The stress of not having a home is literally causing people who are in recovery to relapse. What are you going to do about it?
The honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've said repeatedly here, we're about to begin construction on Lacey House. Originally, that facility, which as it stands now, is 6 beds. We're moving to 12 beds. Mr. Speaker, also the Minister of Social Development and Housing, his department has recently taken over Smith Lodge. That will be also in field, in stream, to provide housing. Thank you much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Smith Lodge, that opens well into my next question. On PEI, women living with homelessness have 2 options when in need of shelter. There's one in Charlottetown, where you can go for literally just to sleep, and one on Lennox Island. If you are a woman with a child, there is no shelter, unless, of course, you live with domestic abuse, and then you have Anderson House. Recently, there was an announcement that Smith Lodge will open as a men's shelter. Question to the minister responsible for women. When will you convince your government to prioritize women and provide appropriate resources for them and their children who have no place to call home?
The honourable Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change, the Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I actually take great insult to that because I am a strong advocate for women, and I ensure that women's needs are always addressed here in Cabinet, and that's something that I really pride myself on. If I look at the housing supports that we do have for women, I mean, I've had number of conversations with Anderson House as well as Blooming House, and I know that there's a study being underway in Summerside, and certainly I feel like we've done tremendous amounts, and I pride myself on government's work on this, and I think we can always do better, but certainly we've done a great job, and I think we've got a long way to go, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this relationship, especially with the Minister responsible for Social Development and Housing, who has done a tremendous job on this file. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You take offense. Imagine how Islanders take offense. Women and children have no shelter. What are you doing about it, Minister?
The honourable Minister of Environment, Water, Climate Change, Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I suggested, I have had an abundance of conversations with the folks over at Anderson House as well as Blooming House, and I'm certainly proud of all the work that they've done there to support women and families. As I had recently suggested, there is a study underway to determine housing needs for women in the Summerside area, and I know my colleague, the Minister of Housing and Social Development, can speak more to it, but I understand there are some housing that's going to be developed along Beach Grove Road that will specifically help support women and families. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're lucky that in my district of Charlottetown, Brighton, we have several seniors complexes there, and of course, the seniors living there all appreciate the fact that they have affordable and quality residences, but still they have concerns that the government apparently are not hearing. For instance, I have one resident that told me that she had had no heat for 5 years, but she dared not complain because she feared the consequences of being put out in the street. So, question to the Minister of Social Development and Housing. Would it be possible to set up maintenance in a way so that tenants can share their complaints without fear of consequences?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and certainly thank the honourable member for bringing this forward. I have not heard that before, but without a doubt, if it is accurate, it is of a major concern. But I think one of the things, too, that was alluded to earlier here this afternoon was with regard to CLIA and the fact that a tenant support worker is in place with funding from the Department of Social Development and Housing. And, you know, this is another way that we move forward to provide assistance, to provide opportunities, to provide counseling to tenants who, for whatever reason, feel that they need additional information, that they need an ear, and that they need direction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall, Meadowbanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Health today. And in the last few days or last few weeks, we've been talking about vaccines, and we're seeing some promising results from Pfizer and Moderna. But there's also questions out there, and the questions are, when will they be ready? How many have we secured, and who gets it first? And these are all good questions, and they're on the forefront of people's minds as people worry about this pandemic, and we're seeing increases around the country. So as of yesterday, Ontario and Alberta have both asserted that they will be receiving 2.4 million. How many doses are earmarked for Prince Edward Island? Are you confident that we possess the necessary storage and logistical measures required to store the vaccines?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this isn't a provincial initiative. It's actually a national initiative that all the provinces and territories are partnering with. Dr. Heather Morrison has provided an update recently with regards to some of the promising vaccines. Mr. Speaker, there will be certain protocols put in place, obviously, to vaccinate our most vulnerable and our frontline health care workers. But, Mr. Speaker, those protocols are still being worked out. Dr. Heather Morrison has also stated that she's very confident that we'll receive our first shipment in the first quarter of the next calendar year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Meadowbank, your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, obviously the minister's been in consultations, and I think the public has the right to know and to be transparent with this whole issue. And I think it's important that many islanders understand who is going to get it first, when is it going to arrive, how much did we secure as a province? And I think those aren't big questions to ask, I think, of the health minister, especially with what we've gone through and the wellness that we've created here on PEI with this whole procedure. We've asked, in fact, the honourable member from O'Leary Inverness asked this question in April. And so we've gone April to now, and we still don't have a plan in place from this government. So, yeah, that's right. Honestly, that's exactly what the answer was, Mr. Premier, was, well, it's too early. Well, now we've got a month, 2 months, 3 months. It's not too early. So why would the minister not provide additional transparent information to the general public in regards to the vaccine?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, once again, it's a national initiative that we're working with the federal government on. Each province, according to their population, will be provided with a certain percentage of vaccines. As I said, there's 2 right now that are very promising in their final test trials. There's a total of 6 vaccines that are being looked at. But, Mr. Speaker, until we know the exact qualification and the verification through Health Canada, we can't actually state exactly how many units will come to PEI. But, Mr. Speaker, we as a government are working with the federal government, and we will provide vaccines as quickly as we can get them here on PEI to our population. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Meadowbanks, your second supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, there's got to be a process that they've been talking about or discussing. the logistics of the vaccines, who's providing the vaccine, is it the pharmacists, how many vaccines are we getting? One of them has to be stored at minus 72 degrees. What are we going to do for storage? Can we store them at pharmacies? Are pharmacies set up for it? Mr. Speaker, these are pretty simple questions that I am sure, after listening to Alberta and Ontario announce exactly how many they're getting, if this minister can't answer these simple questions, I'm not sure. We've gone down this path before with no plan, and this seems to be another path. It's pretty simple. Can the minister not provide us any additional information? I seem to have as much information as the minister has, and that's a problem because he's the Minister of Health and PEI.
Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Okay, so Mr. Speaker, once again, there are two very promising vaccines by two different companies that are right now going through final trials, looking very possible that they will be approved by Health Canada. There are an additional 6 vaccines from different companies currently in various stages of clinical trials. Once they go through the process, once the research is done, and once they're approved by Health Canada, we will have a better idea of all the available vaccines that are out there. Mr. Speaker, as far as the program for rolling out the vaccination process, no, it will not be done through pharmacies. It will be done through public health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A question to the Minister of Education. Earlier this fall, CUPE reported to the Standing Committee on Education that many school buses are overcrowded with as many as 72 students on a bus. How can students be expected to social distance on a bus with 73 people?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, that is a very valid concern that was raised and something that we addressed as best as we could, Mr. Speaker. And we did, of course, have money for additional school buses that were added to the system. Were there enough to make sure we were able to bring down the number of kids on the bus so they were 6 feet apart? No, but we did make masks mandatory on buses to try and deal with that issue. And obviously, of course, masks are mandatory in the general public. We also, Mr. Speaker, encouraged parents to drop their kids at school if they could, to try and alleviate and get the numbers on buses down, Mr. Speaker. And the good news is, Mr. Speaker, that we haven't seen community spread on PEI. We haven't seen cases in our school. And, I just want to thank the students in particular who've really stepped up. They've worn their masks. They've adhered to the rules. And along with the teachers that have guided them, we have very safe classrooms and safe buses in our school systems. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And many parents are a little bit nervous these days with the new rules. And during the same presentation, CUPE said to students that in the higher grades, they're not staying within the cohort, something that we were all worried about in those grades too. Has the minister provided schools with the supports they need to ensure appropriate social distancing at that level?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I believe that we have provided the supports as best as possible, as best as we could do under the circumstances. We've worked with the CPHO, and I think that's the key, Mr. Speaker, because we created operational plans, and it was very clear in the operational plans the size of classes as well as the distance between desks and the number of students and what was happening, and they were approved. And Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to say that every single school on the island is being inspected right now, Mr. Speaker. 35 of them have been inspected so far. There have been some minor findings, but overall we're getting a very clean bill of health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty, your second supplementary.
Yeah, with the new rules, we have to be ready, and I guess a plan has been in place, but what is the trigger point for any changes? What conditions are required for the minister to issue new rules which will ensure social distancing in our schools?
The Honourable Minister of Education, Lifelong Learning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As always, we take our cues from the Chief Public Health Office, and we've seen recent changes there where, masks are now mandatory within the public, in public places. And of course, we already had them mandatory within schools, but we're really working very closely with them. And, the Public Schools Branch and the CSLF, in conjunction with CUPE and the PEI Teachers Federation, are reviewing these policies on an ongoing basis. And if we need to make a change, when it comes, for example, with mandatory masking, right now students are allowed to take them off at their desk. We will do that. Right now, we haven't seen that we've had to make that change, but people are looking at it very closely as we speak. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we heard advice from the Chief Public Health Officer this week that non-medical masks or face coverings will be mandatory in all indoor public spaces in Prince Edward Island effective tomorrow. As a result, the Liberal opposition have received calls from a number of supportive island businesses, owners, who they have a lot of unanswered questions, Mr. Speaker, because they've received no guidance from this government as to how they are supposed to enforce this recommendation. So my question is to the Minister of Health. What have you done to ensure island businesses are prepared and understand the new Chief Public Health Office guidelines?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, Dr. Heather Morrison went public in her press conference. She stated what the policies are and the rules around it and the requirements for wearing face masks. In fact, she even talked about different type of face masks. Mr. Speaker, we have provided the information as well on our websites. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, we have now put available for download to print posters for businesses and public spaces. So, Mr. Speaker, if there's any concerns, if there's any questions, please reach out to either my office or the Chief Public Health Office, and we would be more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And this is a recent announcement, so I'm asking you now. You know, there's been a lot of I guess, businesses that have looked online, they've listened to the announcement, and they didn't get any clarity on it. So the business owners want to know, what is the expectation on island businesses to enforce mandatory masks?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, once again, if there's businesses, if there's individuals out there that have concerns or questions, they simply just have to pick up the phone, go to our website. The information is there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So apparently the minister is telling me the information is there. So if business owners go there and they want to know what the expectations are for them as a business owner, for someone to come in to their business, whether they're liable or not, that information is going to be found. So we'll go looking for that after. Because, Mr. Speaker, businesses want to make sure that they are following the necessary protocols to keep islanders safe. But they need support and they need clear direction from this government. So, Mr. Speaker, my question back to the Minister of Health is a business owner liable if a customer or customers are not willing to wear a mask?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The quick answer to that would be no.
The honourable member from Montague, Kilmuir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hopefully I can get that quick of an answer to my questions, too. Mr. Speaker, over the past, I guess really this week, I don't know about the other members in the House, but I've had a significant number of calls about rotational workers that travel outside the Atlantic bubble. I probably haven't had this many calls since I introduced my vaping bill last fall. A significant amount of them travel outside the Atlantic bubble 2 weeks on, 3 weeks on, and they come home, and they're usually only home for a couple weeks. But there's significant confusion around the rules. They don't know if they have to isolate, if they can get tested. They're being told they can't get tested. Some say they can. A question to the Premier: what are the current requirements for rotational workers traveling outside the Atlantic bubble?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I won't be as brief as my colleague with the answer, Mr. Speaker, because it is a somewhat of a complicated question and requires a complicated answer, I suppose. Mr. Speaker, we have about 900 what we call rotational or essential workers who are registered with the CPHO, and those are individuals who travel back and forth for work or for essential purposes, Mr. Speaker. And I too have gotten many calls, as many of my colleagues in here have, Mr. Speaker. I even had one lady who called and said, could you tell them people to stay away so I don't need to wear a mask in church? And what I said to that lady, Mr. Speaker, was, Them people she refers to are truckers and those who carry our goods and services to market. They're islanders, Mr. Speaker. They bring our fuel here so we can drive our cars. They bring our food, they bring our medicine, and they are critical to what we do, Mr. Speaker. And the CPHO has been working all along to try to make sure those who are on a rotational basis that they have some kind of life, Mr. Speaker. And what they've been required to do all along is they get tested on day 0 or day 1, day 7 and day 10, or day 3, I believe, too, Mr. Speaker. And they to try to make sure that they can move around a bit. But never were they to go to large public gatherings, for example, Mr. Speaker. It would allow them to be with their family, Mr. Speaker, kind of like a work isolation type situation. They could go to the grocery store and actually pick up their groceries, but not go actually into the store for groceries, for example. They're not to go to the rinks, Mr. Speaker. And I know it's a long answer. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, but I will conclude simply by saying that of the 68 cases or so that we've had, all have been imported to our province, Mr. Speaker. And the CPHO recently strengthened the wording around that for a temporary time, Mr. Speaker, because we're in the teeth of this. But we're trying to do the best we can to give all of those important members of PEI and their families a chance to not be in perennial isolation when they're here, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sorry for the long answer, but it was a good question.
The honourable member from Montague-Kilmure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do appreciate that, you know, part of the reason we have been very successful here with COVID is that there are strict rules around isolation and the follow-ups we do with those individuals that do travel into the Atlantic bubble. I guess there's confusion on kind of what's on the website, what's being said at the news conferences, on the weekly updates. I guess, Premier, is there any way that we can improve communication to these individuals so that there isn't such confusion when they do arrive inside the Atlantic bubble?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's a great question and an observation. Look, I mean, I'm the first to say Dr. Morrison would be the second to say that the communication of all of this has been a tremendous logistical challenge. We're doing a lot with a limited staff, and that staff we have that are so dedicated and talented are stretched sometimes. We've added resources over the course of time, but what we've tried to do with our announcements, such as the one we made on Tuesday, was to let Islanders know that changes are coming, Mr. Speaker. We then go about updating the information on the website and going through those channels, and we're also dealing directly with those companies and individuals who would be registered, Mr. Speaker. So, for example, if 300 of those rotational workers were truckers, we would be dealing with the trucking companies that employ them and those individuals as well to make sure they get that information, Mr. Speaker. But yes, making sure people know what to do and when to do it, Mr. Speaker, is critically important. And we've had incredible buy-in here in Prince Edward Island with the protocols, and I expect that will continue. But we will continue to work on that to make sure Islanders know what they need to do and why they need to do it.
The Honourable Member from Montague-Kilmure, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think this is really coming up now because Christmas is coming. It's probably about a month away, and a lot of these people want to come home and be able to spend that time with their family. And I guess they're worried that they're going to get home and they're not going to be able to see their family in that 2-week period. You know, I know I did say before these protocols are important, and you know, it's part of the reason why we do get to have, you know, a lot of the, you know, probably less stringent restrictions than other jurisdictions. I guess to the Premier again, is there any room for flexibility at all that would allow the balance to be maintained between, you know, the safety of Islanders, but allowing these people to see their families when Christmas does arrive?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, just to clarify it, I'm sorry if I might have confused it, but all along the protocol has been so these individuals who are on a rotational basis or are classified as essential workers actually are able to spend with their families and isolate with their families. So that will continue, Mr. Speaker. The testing component of it is to allow for a little bit more freer movement. Normally, for most who come here, Mr. Speaker, we require a 14-day self-isolation. With our rotational workers, we've been able, through testing and other protocols, to allow them to be with their families, Mr. Speaker. So none of that will change. A trucker will still come home isolate with his family will be required to do the testing as they have been, Mr. Speaker, and their limited movement around the province is to be not to include large public gatherings. It's not to be in public outside of their small household cohort, essentially, but they can still, safely drive their kids to school. They can do all of those things, Mr. Speaker, and that's why the rules are in place, Mr. Speaker. They're a little stiffer now because we're in the teeth of a second wave, and COVID is on the shores all around us, Mr. Speaker, and we're trying hard to make sure it doesn't get here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm actually offended and disappointed, Mr. Speaker. This side of the House, we listen to our constituents. We listen to Islanders and we learn from them. We listen and learn with every call that we take, and we know that Islanders across this province are in crisis. Whether they are Islanders who are living on the edge of poverty or in mental health and addictions, whether they're families or seniors or well-off island people who've moved here from another country and can't find somewhere to live, or a doctor who wants to move here and has to turn the posting down because he can't find a place to live, or staff members in our office who have moved back here and can't find somewhere to live. Mr. Speaker, we actually listen, we learn, and we represent, and I am proud that my caucus are representing that here today in this House. We are not doom and gloom, Mr. Speaker. We are speaking for the constituents we represent. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Premier, when his minister responsible for Iraq admits that his file is a low priority for him, as his primary focus is on education, and that the minister responsible for social development and housing has a responsibility only for a small part of the housing story for social housing, seniors and families, when we hear from regular Islanders about all of the housing issues they have, who do you suggest that they call if it's not your caucus? Because it sounds like, honestly, they're calling us because you don't want to hear what they have to say. What do you say when they call you, Mr. Premier?
Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think anyone on this side of the House has denied that there's a challenge with housing, Mr. Speaker. In fact, every answer I've given today, I've called it a crisis, Mr. Speaker. I don't think that I've in any way suggested that it isn't, Mr. Speaker. The job that we all have as the elected officials here in PEI is to try our best to help people, Mr. Speaker. That's what we try to do here. I think if there's people who are having difficulty, Mr. Speaker, we try very hard to help them. We have programs in place to assist, Mr. Speaker. I'm the first one to say that it isn't perfect, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely. We need to do better. We have made incredible strides when it comes to housing, Mr. Speaker. A mobile voucher to make it more affordable, Mr. Speaker. Building a record number of places for people actually to live, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not, I'm not sure what else the honourable member would suggest that we do. I mean, I'm in the job 18 months, Mr. Speaker. We're playing 15 years of catch-up. We're doing the incredible things, Mr. Speaker, but is it perfect? Absolutely not, Mr. Speaker, and we're trying really hard. The capital budget tomorrow will show our further continued investment in affordable housing and in housing here in Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker, and all I can do on the job is try my best, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we've been doing.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we meet, every time we meet and discuss housing, we give government advice. They just don't actually do anything with it. In fact, in November 2019, this House passed the official opposition motion to create a rental registry, a critical source of information for tenants and landlords and one of the only ways to actually enforce rent control. To remind the members, it resolved that the Legislative Assembly would urge government to establish a searchable, free and public rent registry that includes information on current and past rent, reasons for rent increases, legal orders, and all that landlords would be required to do is file. A year later, there has been zero progress and zero activity on this commitment. Question for the Premier. Did you assign responsibility for this to any member of your executive, or was this just another example of all talk, no action?
The honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would be the first to commend the honourable member for being someone who's a good listener and a good collaborator, Mr. Speaker. And that's why I was very open to listening to the conversations we had and actually get to work and jointly come together with the biggest investment in social assistance payments, Mr. Speaker, in the history of PEI. I think that's a good thing, and I was happy to do it, Mr. Speaker, and I give her the full credit for doing it, Mr. Speaker. That's the kind of government we've been trying to lead. I would suggest that the fingerprints of of your caucus, your party over there, are all through some of the accomplishments that we have been able to do here collectively as a province, Mr. Speaker. You have been driving this, and that's an important job, and I'm the first one to tip my hat to you, Mr. Speaker. I don't care where the ideas come from if we can get good results, and I'm open to all good ideas, Mr. Speaker, and none of that will change. I don't know how long I'll be in this job, but as long as I'm here, Mr. Speaker, I'll be open to good ideas, and I'm very grateful, quite honestly, that many of them come from the opposition caucus, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Belvedere, Charlottetown, Belvedere, your final question.
Well, Mr. Premier, I would hope that that means that you'll actually get moving on that rental registry. That would be a great start. Housing insecurity affects everyone, regardless of their income, employment status, where they live in the province, their age, or their gender. As you've heard from my colleagues today, it has a direct impact on mental health and addictions, on recruitment and retention of newcomers, on professionals and youth, seniors and families, and most importantly, right now, our economic recovery and growth. Question for the Premier. Isn't it time you admit that the housing crisis needs the attention and action of your entire government, just as you did with COVID?
The honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for the questions and for the passion behind them. I think that is how we actually get answers here, Mr. Speaker. The one thing that I think I can say quite honestly that I learned most about this job from being in it for the last number of months is that the connection that all of these issues have to each other, and they're not mutually exclusive to one another. And I think I learned that just through the osmosis, I think, of the job, Mr. Speaker, but also through the Economic Growth and Recovery Council, Mr. Speaker. The cross-pollination of all of these issues and how they're all funneled together, Mr. Speaker, it's incredible how connected they are. And I think our success as a province, whether it's from an economy perspective, whether it's from an environmental perspective, or whether it's from a social perspective, Mr. Speaker, is all dependent on people in PEI doing well, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying my hardest to try to do the best we can so that Islanders can find that level of success, Mr. Speaker, that level of comfort, that level of dignity that they need, Mr. Speaker. It's a big, big job, but I'm trying hard every day, and I appreciate the assistance of the colleagues over across who I know feel the same way.
End of question period. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's certainly a pleasure to rise in the House today to announce a new family physician who is coming to Prince Edward Island. Dr. Peter Entwistle will begin his full-time practice at the Tignish Health Centre in February 2021. I'm extremely pleased to welcome Dr. Entwistle to the healthcare team here at PEI. Mr. Speaker, I know residents in the Tignish area will also be very pleased to welcome him and be under his care. Dr. Entwistle, who joins the Health PEI team, hails from Oliver, British Columbia, has a passion for providing innovative, patient-focused, team-based healthcare. He is looking forward to the opportunity to work within an environment that embraces true healthcare principles and values. I'm also pleased to welcome his wife, Anne, who will join the Tignish Health Centre as an LPN. Mr. Speaker, when Dr. Entwistle visited PEI last year, he said he kept hearing about the Tignish Cooperative and their style of practice. He says this is an opportunity for he and his wife to work and enjoy life in the community of Tignish. They are both looking forward to moving to the island in 2021. In addition to this, a temporary nurse practitioner was hired at the centre in March of 2020, and a permanent full-time NP position has now been posted. Mr. Speaker, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Dr. Declan Fox, former family physician of the centre, and all other physicians and nurse practitioners who had offered locum support on-site and virtually while recruitment efforts were underway. I want to give kudos to the team at Recruitment and Retention, Health PEI, and the Tignish Health Centre and their great community for all their work behind the scenes to make this possible. Recruitment efforts continue, and I am so pleased as we continue to see more and more progress in this area. Mr. Speaker, this week alone, we had 4 letters of offer signed, and another 7 are in the final stages of the selection process. Prince Edward Island is a wonderful place to live and work, and it is tremendous to see more and more healthcare professionals choose to call PEI home. Mr. Speaker, I truly wish I could have made this announcement yesterday, but to the honourable member for Tignish Palmer Road, happy belated birthday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, this is certainly welcome news, and we welcome this new doctor to Tignish. It's fantastic to hear that. We've heard quite a bit about new initiatives and efforts to recruit new physicians to PEI, which is wonderful to hear. But I have to note that we've heard very little about what initiatives will be put into place to recruit and retain more nurses to Prince Edward Island. I want to highlight a few recent examples that show us that we need to take our nursing shortage more seriously. A lack of nurses has kept the new wing at the PEI Seniors Home in Wellington closed. The building is open and ready to go, but they can't fill those beds because they don't have enough nursing staff. The Nurses Union has highlighted that the psychiatric urgent care clinic closure occurred because they didn't have enough nursing staff, and that this was a failure to plan and to find innovative ways to make sure we can recruit and retain staff in our mental health services. The Western Hospital has repeatedly been closed due to nursing shortages. Just this week, the minister announced 2 new builds under the new mental health campus, the addition to Lacey House and the Day Treatment Center. But how will they be any good if we don't have staff to run them? We'll be in the same situation as the seniors' home, a nice building, but no staff to fill the beds, or to allow us to fill the beds. Nurses are feeling bounced around and not acknowledged in a tangible way. They are burnt out, and we've been in a critical nursing shortage for years. COVID has only made this problem worse, and we need to do something now to address it. Nurses across this province need to hear that the minister understands and cares about their needs, their well-being, and the safety that they are facing, the safety challenges in perpetually understaffed workplaces. I sincerely hope that the minister will address this critical issue soon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Larry-Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, we've heard the minister congratulate himself many times in this legislature, Mr. Speaker, on his physician recruitment plan. And I will admit new hires are positive, and I certainly, on behalf of Tignish Palmer Road myself, I do congratulate him on that announcement of a new doctor coming to Tignish. And I also want to thank Dr. Declan Fox for his service over the years there. Dr. Fox was a doctor I got to know pretty well. He tended to like to go to some of the same establishments for craft beer as I did, so I was quite frequent in that regard. But unfortunately, the minister never announces how many doctors are leaving or how many doctors are retiring. That's so that we always sort of get the positive but never want to be the negative. So that's all part of it. But everyone on this side of the House certainly is hopeful that this is something, that an initiative that will be a success. But I just want to mention a few things here. So Dr. Fox's patients never actually went on the patient registry, Mr. Speaker. He was still providing some virtual care for these patients, and locums were filling in some of the gap. But actually, as I checked today, Mr. Speaker, there are 14,400 patients on the patient registry still without a family doctor. This announcement doesn't address any of that today, Mr. Speaker. I was certainly criticized by that member many times when there was 8,000 on the patient registry, and I was embarrassed about that, Mr. Speaker. So 14,400 is quite a bit different than that. So certainly there's lots of people that are falling between the cracks. Some of his recruitment efforts, like that failed pub crawl through Ireland, didn't seem to return any physicians, or we haven't heard of any yet. And, I certainly would say that the minister still has to stop shuffling the deck, Mr. Speaker, in healthcare. We have to, it's great, lose one, you gain one, but we got to start gaining and getting some of those 14,400 dealt with, Mr. Speaker. And I do think it's really important to identify that a lot of this is done by our foundations too. So the Tignish Health Centre certainly did a lot of work in helping with this recruitment plan. And I know our foundation in O'Leary does the same in trying to help with the recruiting. And I think that's really important. But like I say, existing physician complements don't change the situation just by adding one when you lose one. So I just wanted to add that comment, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am proud today about a program that was recently delivered in support of the PEI oyster industry. The Oyster Enhancement Fund was administered by the PEI Shellfish Association in collaboration with our Provincial Department of Fisheries and Communities. As we all know, COVID-19 has had a huge impact on many industries, including the retail and hospitality sectors, which are typically the main buyers in the PEI oyster market. As a result of this, there were excessive oysters available from oyster growers. And our department saw this as an opportunity to add to our annual oyster enhancement efforts that we conduct each year with the PEIF Shellfish Association, and to work on an action plan to help sustain the commercial-wide oyster fishery. Mr. Speaker, through that plan, more than 4 million surplus oysters were from approximately 56 growers were redistributed into the commercial fished wild oyster beds with the following goals in mind: to further enhance commercial-wide oyster beds by enhancing the amount of oysters available, to develop a new oyster bed for future harvest, to increase the amount of broadstock available at the Biddeford River Spat Collection Reserve, an important oyster spat collection area. Mr. Speaker, and to use some of the oysters in the pilot project to improve the water quality in areas where there are annual water quality issues. This program was supported by industry and was delivered with the help of the PEI Aquaculture Alliance, the PEI Shellfish Association, and industry partners. Mr. Speaker, the program was completed by the end of October. Mr. Speaker, this is a great example of some of the sustainable and innovative projects taking place to support our seafood and aquaculture industries and to also benefit the environment across Prince Edward Island. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say that while some markets are being hit hard by COVID-19 pandemic, and our government is working with islanders to do everything we can to support industries through this difficult time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise in response of this statement. I think this was a fantastic initiative that primarily took place due to COVID-19 impacting the markets. This program allowed for the federal and provincial governments to support our oyster growers in aquaculture while also building a sustainable future for the wild oyster fishery. This program provided an opportunity for the aquaculture and wild oyster fishers to collaborate and build relationships as well. The Shellfish Association members were able to give input in what oyster beds would be enhanced, and from what I have been told, those opinions were listened to. I want to also acknowledge the incredible work of Peter Warris and the Aquaculture Alliance for their on-the-ground support to make this program a reality. This project even allowed for the seeding of a new area in St. Peter's Bay that will expand the oyster fishery in the eastern part of the province as well. I think we are all aware that it is likely the impacts of COVID-19 will continue to have a negative impact on markets in the 2021 season. I hope the minister will continue to work with the federal government to allow this program to continue and further enhance future opportunities for both our wild and cultured oyster fishers and growers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tignish Pomeroy, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this was a good initiative, but Mr. Speaker, there's more to be done. The oyster industry is a growing industry in our province. It's one that is vital to the overall performance of the fishing industry. And we are very proud of the products that our oyster fishers and producers cultivate here in this province. But with so much uncertainty in our economy, it is my hope that the minister understands exactly what is at risk. With economies all over the world slowing and grinding to a halt, it is imperative that this government offer our oyster producers more than lip service. And we've seen them do this with other sectors in our economy, Mr. Speaker, with notably the tourism and retail operators who have been devastated. Mr. Speaker, industry support is more than just platitudes offered from inside the legislature, and is more than just cutting a check. And cutting the check, I have to give credit to the federal government. I know that Bobby Morrissey up my way has worked really hard for the oyster fishermen. So, Mr. Speaker, real support requires outside the box, 11 years, outside the box and thinking creativity on the part of the government, coupled with a willingness to listen to the industry professionals. And I do have to, there's a little bit of a slap I'm giving, but I do have to give kudos to the minister because he is out and about, and I see him on the wharves, I see him on the boats, and I hear back from the fishers that he's out speaking to them. So I have to give him credit for doing that. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. I saw him on a speedboat.
Okay, members. Presenting and receiving petitions. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table 3 written questions. The first one would be requesting correspondence from government on the divestiture of land recently. Also, when the proclamation of the Registered Professional Planners Act will happen, as well as information on the RFP process for climate change risk assessment. Oh, and I move, seconded by the member from Summerside South Drive, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of this House, I beg to table a CBC report on October 28, 2020, where the Health PEI CEO stated nearly 57% of cancelled surgeries have been completed in PEI from the backlog of COVID. And I move, seconded by the Charlottetown member from Charlottetown West Royalty, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table the provincial's handling potential COVID-19 spread in school, a CBC article dated October 13th, and I move, seconded by O'Leary Inverness.
Shall it carry? Said bill do. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg to table the marine infrastructure, the foundation for a strong seafood sector in Atlantic Canada document. And I move and second this by the Minister of Agriculture that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable, the Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By leave of the House, I beg to table the Malpeque Harbour Authority Economic Impact Analysis, a new wharf design study dated March 2020, and I move, second by the Minister of Agriculture, that the said document now be received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change, Minister responsible for the status of women.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table documents referenced in my responses to questions as taken as notice, and I move, seconded by the Minister of Fisheries and Communities, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? Any more table of documents that I missed? No? Reports by committees? Introduction of government bills. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness. The Honourable.
Sorry, I was going by the order sheet. I thought someone was up before me. Mr. Speaker, I beg to leave to introduce a bill to be intituled Medical Society Act. I move, seconded by the Honourable Premier, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 77, Medical Society Act, read a first time.
Overview, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this act is to continue the Medical Society of PEI as a corporate entity.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister of Justice, Public Safety and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to leave to introduce a bill to be intituled Opiate Damages and Healthcare Cost Recovery Act, and I move, seconded by the Minister of Health and Wellness, that the same be now received and read the first time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 75, Opioid Damages and Healthcare Recovery Costs Act, read a first time.
Overview, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This act provides a legal framework for the government to carry on a direct and distinct legal action against certain parties to recover the costs of health care benefits provided in relation to the opioid crisis.
Any more government bills? No more government motions other than government. The Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill to be intituled the Legislative Assembly Act, and I move, seconded by the Leader of the Opposition, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall carry.
Bill number 125, Legislative Assembly Act, read a first time.
Overview, member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm introducing this bill on behalf of the Standing Committee on Legislative Management. This bill is intended to modernize the current Legislative Assembly Act. It formalizes the administrative and operational practices for the Office of the Legislative Assembly, the Office of the Speaker, and the Standing Committee on Legislative Assembly Management.
The honourable member from O'Leary, Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill to be entitled An Act to Amend the Animal Health Act, and I move, seconded by the Leader of the Third Party, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 120, an act to amend the Animal Health Act, read a first time.
Overview, member.
Speaker, this is an act that will amend the Animal Health Act to add sections prohibiting entry to a place in which animals are kept and could result in the exposure of an animal to a disease or a toxic substance that is capable of affecting or contaminating them, and sets out penalties which would apply to that.
The honourable member from O'Leary, Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill to be entitled An Act to Amend the Animal Welfare Act, and I move, seconded by the Leader of the Third Party, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 124, an act to amend the Animal Welfare Act, read a first time.
Overview, member.
It's very similar, Mr. Speaker, to the previous act, but this prohibits any person without lawful authority or excuse from entering a building other enclosed spaces in which commercial animals are being kept, and knowing that being reckless as whether entering such a place could result in the release or escape of any commercial animals. It also makes a person who contravenes that act liable and for the cost of any damage to those animals.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill to be entitled An Act to Amend the Electric Power Act, and I move, seconded by the member from Charlottetown Victoria Park, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall it carry? Overview. Oh, sorry.
Bill number 123, an act to amend the Electric Power Act, read a first time.
Overview, member.
This bill would amend the Electric Power Act to require a public utility to include estimates of emissions reductions under an energy efficiency and demand-side resources plan submitted to IRAC, and it would also require IRAC decisions regarding rates, tolls, or charges to promote energy efficiency and demand-side resource measures. Additionally, it would require that decisions relating to residential classes of customers do not give less expensive power to customers that use more energy.
Orders of the day, government, other than government. Government motions. The honourable member from Tignish Pomeroy, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the member from Charlottetown West Royalty, that the bill number 119, or that the bill number 119, order of the day, be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order number 38, Down Syndrome Day Act Bill, Down Syndrome Day Act, Bill number 119, ordered for second reading.
The honourable member from Tignish Pomeroy, Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I moved and seconded by the member from Charlottetown West Royalty that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 119, Down Syndrome Day Act, read a second time.
The honourable member from Tignish Pomeroy, Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the member from Charlottetown West Royalty, that this House do now resolve itself into Committee of the Whole House to take in consideration said bill.
The honourable member from Montague Kilmuir to chair the Committee of the Whole, please.
The House is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled Down Syndrome Day Act. Is it the pleasure of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause, or just a general?
Chair.
Sorry.
Can I just give a general overview of the bill's intent?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to introduce legislation recognizing Down Syndrome Awareness Day, which is March the 21st of every year. In 2011, the UN declared March 21st Down Syndrome Awareness Day and called on government, private sector, and civil society to observe the day in an appropriate manner. The date, March 21st, was chosen due to the fact that March is the third month of the year, which signifies the triplication of the 21st chromosome, hence the reason for the 21st day of March. Approximately 1 in every 781 babies born in Canada is born with Down syndrome. There's also an estimated 45,000 Canadians with Down syndrome. This said, I am happy to introduce this legislation and hope all members will offer their support for recognizing March 21st as Down Syndrome Day here on PEI. And I also have a request to bring a stranger onto the floor.
Yep. We have a request to bring a stranger on the floor. So,
Yeah, right at the end of the table. Yeah, you can take a seat. And Janet, if you feel comfortable, you can take that off.
Is it okay?
Yep.
Want to be sure.
Okay, there you go. You can push up to the table.
Is that good?
And when people speak to you, when you go to answer, just try to speak in the microphone, okay?
Into the microphone?
Yep, that's fine where you're at.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Just ask her to introduce herself.
Janet, could you just introduce yourself for Hansard? You can just speak into the microphone in front of you.
Okay. Do I just leave it there?
You're fine where you're at. Yep.
Okay. Well, my name is Gina Charchak, and I'm from Alberton.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Leader of the third party?
Thank you very much, Chair. And welcome, Janet, to the Legislative Assembly on this very important day.
Thanks.
I just have a question for you. What is something you'd want people to know and understand about yourself?
What do I want people to know about myself? Well, first of all, I want people to know that I am passionate about my advocacy work, and that I do speak up for people who cannot speak up for themselves, and that I am a Special Olympics athlete and leader, and I'm also the Canadian representative for Down Syndrome International.
Leader of the third party?
Thank you, Chair. I just would like to thank you very much for sharing that with us, and I'll let someone else ask some questions at this point. Thank you very much, Janet. Thank you, Chair.
O'Leary Inverness?
Janet, I guess I've known you for a long, long time. And,
what do you think?
I even believe, I think you were pretty good friends with one of my cousins there. I'm not sure if you're still in that relationship or not, but
okay.
That'd be Paul Phillips. You know
Paul
pretty
Phillips,
well.
yeah.
But
Yeah, he's still
anyway,
my boyfriend.
well, I guess I was referring to, but from my perspective, I used to work with Janet when I was working with Community Inclusions, and you've always been a great advocate for people with Down syndrome and people with intellectual disabilities. But I think it's important to maybe, for the record here at Hansard, this is a pretty prestigious facility. You're here now having the opportunity to speak for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And maybe you could speak a little bit about the barriers that you've overcome as a person in dealing with your issue of Down syndrome.
The barriers, right? Okay. I believe I have at least two. My first barrier was sports when I was younger, when I was a kid, because you had to be a really good athlete and you had to be very competitive at the time to be on a team. But when I joined Special Olympics, I joined in 1996, that changed my life because I was able to play at my skill level and with my friends. And that was one of my barriers. My other barrier was to do with housing. First of all, I did advocate for a place in Alberton. It's called Alberton House. But I got able to get the land rezoned, and I helped it with, like, looking for funding. I even talked to the Rotary Club in Summerside to get furniture and things. But I lived there for 6 years, and now I am living on my own, and I'm very proud of myself for doing that.
O'Leary and Burness?
I know you also advocated quite extensively for the O'Leary Lions Club independent housing project there
Yeah.
in O'Leary.
That is correct.
But you didn't choose to live in O'Leary. I'm not sure why that is. But anyway, I just wanted to thank you for your advocacy on behalf of people with intellectual disabilities on PEI and really all across Canada and throughout the world. So thanks for the good work that you do.
You're welcome, Robert.
Thanks.
Any further? Charlottetown West Royalton?
Yes, I want to thank you for coming in and talking about your advocacy, and
Yeah.
I've heard you're a very good Special Olympian, so.
I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I just wanted to ask, how do you cope with any tough days?
How do I cope with tough days?
Yeah.
Well, that is a good question. I actually know that everyone does have, everybody has their own tough days. I know that.
Yeah.
But for me, I do like to work out and do yoga, and I also like to talk to people, like to my family and my friends, if I had a hard day.
Yeah. That's great. Well, that's a great answer. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming in today.
Mm.
Leader of the third party?
Thanks again, Janet. Thanks again, Janet, and thanks for sharing some of your stories with us. I'd just like to ask you a question, like going forward, like, is there something that you would like to see or excites you going forward into your future?
What excites me?
Mm-hmm.
Just hang on. About my future. Okay. I'm thinking here, once this bill does get passed, I am actually excited to see everybody, for everyone to see our abilities and to see our abilities, yeah.
Leader of the third party?
Once again, I just want to thank you very, very much. It's quite a nervy time to come in and sit here in front of strangers, and certainly welcome to have you here and hear your story, and thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Charlottetown Victoria Park?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming in, Janet. I had the pleasure of attending the ACL conference where you were there talking about housing, so it's nice to see you again. I'm just wondering, in your opinion, is there anything that government could be doing to better support islanders and their families who are living with Down syndrome?
In my opinion, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me think. Okay, I think you guys could. I was thinking you guys could use your money to maybe to help with number one, for supportive and affordable housing, inclusive education in schools, and what was the other one? I had a third one. Uh-oh.
That's all right. If you think of it after, we can come back.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay?
Oh, housing.
Okay.
I said housing, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Oh, no, employment. For supportive employment, like to help with job coaches and stuff like that. So we can learn to do the job and do it well.
Thank you.
Charlottetown Victoria Park?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Janet. Those are great. My last question is, I'm wondering if, in your mind, what sort of special activities would maybe go along with this day?
Special activities?
Yeah, would there be anything special way of celebrating this day that you see?
For World Down Syndrome Day?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. Okay, gotta think about what we have done before. I know there's this one called Lots of Socks thing.
Yeah.
That we put on 2 different color different socks. I guess must have saw it on my Facebook one time. Me and my mom put 2 different color socks on them to celebrate World Down Syndrome Day. And we took a picture of our feet. It's to show that we all have different abilities.
Cheryl, 10 Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. I really love that answer, and I think that everyone in this house, we must remember that and wear 2 different socks next March 21st.
Yes, March the 21st. Yes, I forget how it goes, but I think it's the 3rd month, and it's like 3 copies, right?
Of the chromosome, 21st chromosome.
Yeah, the 21st chromosome. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Janet, for being here. That's good, Chair.
Transportation, infrastructure, and energy.
Thank you. Thank you to the member for bringing this forward, and thank you, Jan, for coming and speaking. I guess my question
You're welcome.
is, from what I understand from today, you do a lot of advocacy work
I do.
in Down syndrome, and I wonder what this day would mean in helping you in your efforts for advocacy.
Oh.
How is proclaiming this day going to help you? So it would be more like bring more public awareness?
To bring more public awareness
Yeah, to Down syndrome?
to Down syndrome.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that it?
Yep.
Okay.
Or you can add whatever you want.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah. How would this day help you? How does 21st?
to bring awareness.
To Down syndrome. So you could talk maybe about your position on the international board.
Oh, right. Because I am the Canadian representative for Down Syndrome International.
Exactly. Yep.
This is a tough question. What?
You have lots of time.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Just talk about how you advocate for people with Down syndrome.
Oh, yeah. I do advocate for people with Down syndrome. I think it's because I want to see, I advocate for them because I want them to have the best possible life they can get.
Transportation, infrastructure, and energy.
Thank you, and I want to thank you for coming today, and I want to thank the member for bringing this forward. I think it's really important, and I do think that this will help in your advocacy, and I look forward to next March 21st and see how we'll celebrate on the island. I think it'll be a big day. So
Yeah,
that's it for me.
definitely.
Leader of the third party.
Thanks again, Janet. And thanks again, Janet. I just have a quick question. Do you know a gentleman in Musqueam by the name of Travis Perry? Have you ever met Travis Perry? He's from
Travis
my community
Perry,
in
have I met
Musqueam.
him?
You know him on Facebook.
Oh, no, on Facebook.
You know him on Facebook?
Yeah.
Probably. I would likely know to see, like,
Uh-huh.
I know the pictures, like, names and faces, I think.
Well, he's a very fine man in our community. He's a volunteer member of the Musqueam Fire Department, and he's well respected, and we certainly we
Yeah.
all enjoy Travis Perry. Thank you very much for your advocacy for people with Down syndrome. Thank you for coming in.
You are very welcome. I'm actually proud to be here, too.
Do we have any more questions for Janet? Oh, social development and housing.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank you, Janet, for coming down. Thank the honourable member for bringing this forward. Janet is a constituent of mine, District 26, Albert and Bloomfield. And first of all, I want to congratulate Janet on all of her accomplishments over the years, athletics, Special Olympics. She has been a real ambassador right across the province, right across the world, really, for the province of Prince Edward Island. So again, Janet, congratulations for all of the things that you have done. You have helped, let's face it, you've helped to put PEI on the map worldwide, and you deserve a tremendous amount of credit for that, so thank you. Just one question, Janet.
Sure.
When you've traveled extensively for sports, for other events,
Yeah.
if there is one thing that you've taken from those travels, from those experiences, and things that you've seen across the world, that you would bring back to PEI and make a suggestion for us here on the island. If there's one or two things that come to mind,
Oh.
just wondering what they might be.
Okay. For my travels?
So when you're traveling and you're
Yeah.
speaking to other people
Yeah.
from all across the world,
That's correct.
are there any ideas that they give you that you would like to see happen here?
Oh, that's what he means.
Yeah.
Okay. Not sure.
Any of the conversations you've had with other people that may have given you some idea that, oh, you know, that could work here in PEI?
Huh. I'm just trying to think.
I know one thing. That's you being on the floor today promoting this bill, too.
Oh, yeah, that'd be one of the things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, me here promoting, yeah, we're here today, I'm
Mhm.
promoting this bill today, so,
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, one more.
No, and just,
Social development and housing.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just want to, again, thank Janet for coming and for her answer to my question. And again, thank the honorable member for bringing this forward. And I personally will be very happy to support this bill. So thank you.
Awesome.
All right.
I have just something
Sure.
to say if I can say in closing. Okay, thank you. I just want to thank Janet for coming in today. I've known Janet for quite a while.
Yeah.
We've traveled a little bit.
We have,
I know,
right?
and Janet is great for, I think it was 15, 16 years ago, we were in Brandon, Manitoba, and I was flying back, and you were flying to Ireland to represent Canada.
Oh, that was in Austria.
Oh, was it Austria? I thought it was. We'll argue about that. We'll talk about that one later. I don't know that one because you're everywhere. But she's a great advocate
Yeah,
for
I'm
people
sorry.
with Down syndrome. No, that's fine. And
Okay.
so you fly internationally. You
I
speak with
do.
people internationally. You're a great representative. I'm just very, very proud of you,
Thank you.
as are all of us in this room and all Islanders. And you also do motivational speaking.
I do.
And where did that come from?
Where did that come from?
4-H. You used to be a great member in
Yeah.
4-H.
I used to be a great member in 4-H, for sure.
Yeah, and then you aged out, and you won some competitions on public speaking
Oh,
also.
I have, yeah.
Yes, yeah, so I just wanted to throw that in there too. But Janet's been great for knocking down barriers and for advocacy.
Yeah.
You know, living independently, that's a
Because
big,
I'm pretty
big,
passionate to help others.
you
so.
very, very, and that's clear to see. So again, I want to thank not only Janet, but other people from my district
Yeah.
who have inspired me, like Rebecca Carragher.
Oh, yeah, I know her.
Yeah,
Yes.
Lozanne Handrahan,
Yep.
Ivan Arsenault,
Ivan, I know him.
Sarah Shea,
I know her too.
and do you know Aiden Wilson?
Not very well.
Aiden is very young, but he's up and coming. He's going to be an athlete pretty soon. He's going to
Really?
give everybody a run for their money.
That'd be awesome.
Okay, great. So Janet, I want to thank you again for coming in today, and I want to thank all members for
You're
the
welcome.
questions. And
They were great questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Janet, and I think you've probably given better answers than a lot of people that have sat there before.
I know, right?
And now we get to say, shall the bill carry?
Very awesome.
And
Awesome.
shall the preamble carry?
Okay. Wow.
Just wait, I'll take you out in a minute, okay? Yeah. Okay, I move the title.
Down Syndrome Day Act.
I move the
Shall it carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Mr. Chair, I move that the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry?
Just a few more minutes, okay? Yeah.
Do you want to, I can leave too, right? Okay, good.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having had under consideration a bill to be intituled Down Syndrome Day Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Orders of the day other than government?
Call on motion 95.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Was that already in the phone?
Motion 95. The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty moves, seconded by the honourable member from O'Leary-Inverness, the following motion. Whereas many islanders have taken a leadership position in the elimination of racial discrimination, and whereas inequities still exist, and whereas these inequities involve all elements of society, including justice, housing, education, healthcare, and employment, and whereas there is a sincere desire to address these inequities through new legislative and policy approaches in government, and whereas government has promised to use a progressive lens in its deliberations to address issues of racial inequity, and whereas Cabinet's current decision-making process does not explicitly require a thorough examination of implications relative to racial equity, therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to agree to an immediate and full review of its practices relative to its response to racial inequities. And be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to introduce practical methods to ensure a racially aware process in terms of legislation, regulation, and cabinet decision-making.
The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty to start debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on this important motion. Racism is a public health issue on PEI. As noted by Dr. Heather Morrison, our Chief Public Health Officer, the social determinants of health identify 3 factors that influence health. Race, poverty, and culture are among them. Last summer on June 5th, almost 6 months ago, a grassroots activity led by the Black Cultural Society walked through the streets of our capital city calling for an end to racism on PEI. It was reported to be the largest march for racial justice in provincial history. Shortly after, on June 19th, Indigenous Lives Matter, PEI Healing Walk for Justice proudly walked through the streets of Charlottetown. These public displays are calls for action for our government to step up and deal with racism on PEI. We need to do something, not just because of the marches. We need to take action to combat racism because it's the right thing to do and will benefit all of us. On June 12th, I had the honor and privilege to present to this Legislative Assembly a petition on behalf of the Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, or the BIPOC community, organization calling on government to a complete and extensive review of all provincial legislation and policies and apply a racially focused lens. An immediate focus on education, healthcare, well-being, and job security. At that time, that very day, every one of us in this House stood beside the BIPOC representatives outside of the chambers to pledge our support. The following day, the Premier said, "Now is the time for action to make legislation, regulations, and policies inclusive for the BIPOC Islanders to make positive change in PEI." Unfortunately, talking about these things is the easy part. Almost 6 months have passed, and I would ask the question, what action has been taken by our government leaders over that 6 months? We need positive impacts now. The people are waiting. Diversity, Mr. Speaker, is our strength, but only if the people that marched in the streets feel the impact. I want to tell a story about a family that's here on Prince Edward Island. The father was here for the last 3 years. He's a professional basketball player playing for the Island Storm. And he had such a great experience in Prince Edward Island. He decided to move his family from California. And it's very, very rare to have to sign a multi-year contract with the basketball program in Charlottetown. I think he might have been the second player only to do that. Robbie came and he set up roots with his family here. He couldn't afford housing in the city, so he moved out to rural Prince Edward Island, and they're enjoying where they live. But they face many challenges as a Black family coming to Prince Edward Island. He is the type of person that we need more of in Prince Edward Island. And just recently we were chatting and we were talking about different ideas about some different plans because, as you know, COVID has affected us in many different ways. Well, it's affected him as a professional athlete. So he's adapting, he's moving, he's transitioning to different things. And along the way, we got him excited to talk about what it is he wants to do, be a motivational speaker in school, help kids in school. He wants all play for basketball, and he's going to work towards that. And he got so excited, he looked at me, Mr. Speaker, and he said, he looked and he touched the side of his hair, and he said, "Do I need to do anything with my hair, Gord?" And that says more to me than anything, because what he was saying to me is, he can't change the color of his skin. Am I good enough to fit in and do these things that I'm planning on doing? Because you can control your hair, but you cannot control your skin color. Most recently has a young boy, Robbie Jr., in kindergarten, that amongst playing with other friends, there's situations that happen as a young Black boy in a new world. Anyway, there were some tensions at that level that happened, and Robbie reached out to me and we chatted, and the situation was diffused. The teacher did a great job. The school did a great job. The family did a great job of handling a difficult situation. And everybody got through it. It's a success story about how we deal with that and how Islanders deal with racial issues. But it hurts the family. And I went out to see Robbie and little Robbie Jr., and he's just like the other boys. He's playing with dinosaurs. He wants to be an arachnophobic, I can't even say the word, but he showed me all his dinosaur collections. And it's these type of struggles that we need to be better at. And we're doing a good job in Prince Edward Island, but we need to trudge forward. I just want to say to Robbie and his family, because I know they're watching today, your presence on this island is a gift to us. Thank you. And this family is having, and Robbie also said to me, this family is having a baby. And he looked at me and he said, "We're having our baby, and that baby will be an Islander." And that's what we need more of. We have to listen to the family stories, embrace their experiences, and support them. This will teach us how to be better. Most BIPOC people don't have family here. Our island, our people, we are their family, and we must remember that. I would say to them, this is your home. Our vision is moving from one of equality to equity. The idea of equality is a fantasy of the past, whereas equity, ensuring everyone has what they need, is the way of the future, and it's not a fantasy. It's what will make our province great. Diversity spurs innovation, increases productivity, and creates healthy, respectable communities. They see the world through a new perspective, and we must embrace that. Getting ready for this motion, I talked to many residents in my community, and I can come out and ask them, point blank, have you been racially discriminated against in Prince Edward Island? And everybody will be happy to know that their answer primarily is no. But what they do continue to tell me is that the stories like Tommy, who I talked to in my district, he came to Prince Edward Island because a friend of his from his community in Africa came. The problem is that these two gentlemen were from Rwanda. And upon talking to Tommy, he shared with me that every single member of his family was killed during the genocide in Rwanda. He only has a grandmother left. But he chose PEI to be his home. He's here now. You would only see somebody at night who was black wearing a hoodie. I see somebody that I need to learn from and I need to be there for. We need to have deeper conversations with people to make sure that we understand their stories. What he went on to say is this young man's homesick. He faces depression and anxiety is around the corner. And these are some of the issues that we face in our black or BIPOC populations. We have to do a better job of reaching out with the services, reaching out, going to them and asking, what can we do to help? Our past around BIPOC issues is a struggle. And I can think no further than 400 meters away from this building stood a community called the Bog. And if I ask everybody in this chamber to have more than a 5-minute conversation about the history of the Bog, we would struggle because we don't know. We don't understand. If it wasn't for Jim Hornby and the likes of Scott Parsons, we might not know any more than what we do about those areas. That's not good enough. We don't even have as much as a plaque there. And it's been 6 months since 10,000 people gathered there and sent our province a message. Indigenous issues are on the forefront, and I want to say, again, getting ready for this motion, the member from O'Leary and Inverness and I, we sat down and had an unbelievable conversation about the issues at Lennox Island, where we could talk freely about how we could support and help and where we've gone wrong in the past. We need to keep these dialogues going. Similar to the petition, we need a comprehensive review of all provincial legislations and policies through the lens of equity for all races. An immediate focus on education. What I mean by this is encouraging growth through diversity training, unconscious bias training, and working with both teachers and students to make sure that we understand our history, where we've come from, and where we're going as an inclusive community. Health and wellness. We look at the social determinants of health, and if you look closely at them, BIPOC members fall within a lot of those social determinants of health. And I want to have a dialogue with the minister to do better amongst these important areas. Job security and individual growth. Professional development is lacking. We need more management training and leadership training for our BIPOC community. Some of the solutions that you think about might be a BIPOC community navigator, where, again, we don't talk about those things in the BIPOC community. We need more outreach. We need to go to them to make sure that we understand. And preparing for this, I talked to the counseling services, somebody at the counseling services at UPI, and I asked them what in general are some of the issues that BIPOC people face when they come in. And she said anxiety and depression. It's difficult. It's difficult to be away. It's difficult to set up new routes. We need to do better. We are all family. I want to say to the BIPOC community that this is your island and change is coming. That's an important message. We need to continue to talk. We have to move forward and move forward at a more rapid rate. And I think that we can do it all together. To quote Barack Obama, in the end, it's not about finding policies that work. It's about forging consensus and fighting cynicism and finding the will to make change. That's where we are. We have to find it. I think we're all in this together. And this is not an attack on government. This is something that it's too big to be attacking back and forth. History is at fault. We have the opportunity to write a new script. Let's write it together. Now is the time to move forward with action, investments, measurements, and show Islanders that this is an important issue. During this, I brought this up in the resolutions. I brought this document up. It's a memorandum to Executive Council, and I'll table it afterwards. This document is a document that goes to Cabinet to make all decisions at the highest level of our provincial government. I urge government to look at this document and make sure it's reflective of BIPOC initiatives and issues. That's very important, because if we can make a change at the highest level in Prince Edward Island, that's a great place to start. To change your mind, first start thinking differently. And I think we're all on that same page. We have much work to do, but I'm sure that as I talk to everybody here in the BIPOC community, understand that we are all working together to make it better. We're going to get this right, and we're going to do it together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from O'Leary Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I may grab the podium if you don't mind, member. Mr. Speaker, I too am honoured to be able to second this particular motion, and I certainly look forward to hearing some of the discussion on the motion here today. From my perspective, the member, I'm really honoured that the member from Charlottetown West Royalty contacted me, and he talked a little earlier about our discussion that we had, and it was just kind of a, whether by chance or what it really was, but he contacted me and said, we wanted to get a sense of what my thinking was on the motion and some of those things. I don't know whether it's because I've been here a little bit longer or exactly what, but it just happened to be, Mr. Speaker, that I think about 2 or 3 days before that, I had a meeting with Madeleine Sark over in Lennox Island, and Lennox Island encompasses one of the polls, one of the 10 polls in my district of O'Leary Inverness. And, I live right next door. I'm in the community of Lot 11, which is the next door community. And Madeleine and I, we go back a ways, and she basically had some issues around what my views as an MLA for the area were regarding the issue of moderate livelihood, that particular issue within the fishing industry. So at the time, I guess I was self-isolating because I just had gotten back from my daughter's wedding. So I said, I'll drop over and see you whenever I'm out of isolation. So anyway, over I went to her home, and we had a conversation for probably, 2 hours maybe, something like that. And, as a person who lives next door, represents Indigenous populations, different cultures than what I tend to be used to, we had an engaging conversation and a real issue where I'll say that I thought I had a general understanding of the challenges that other minorities people might have within a community, the different skin tones, all of those particular issues. You really don't until you have a real engaging conversation with somebody about that and talk about these issues. She had said that there was MLAs, other places texted her and gave her phone calls and stuff, but she said they really didn't engage and care. They were doing it because they thought they needed to do something of that nature. And from my perspective, Mr. Speaker, it really was enlightening, and I really appreciate her for that. And from my perspective, I guess, as the MLA that represents the area, I'm certainly honoured that the member from Charlottetown West Royalty would ask me to second this particular motion. So certainly we've seen the world has changed a lot, Mr. Speaker, really more recently. When we talk about the things that happened recently, even here in Prince Edward Island last June, we had basically an opportunity to maybe re-examine our racial awareness here in Prince Edward Island, our fundamentals on how we look at cultures and how different cultures interact within this province, Mr. Speaker, and how we as communities have to come together as a collective will as islanders to understand each other's differences and what maybe the paths that we've gotten to get to where we are here today, Mr. Speaker. We certainly, a lot of this stuff has maybe boiled to the surface when we talk about what happened with George Floyd, what we seem to be seeing down in the U.S., and how law enforcement officers have kind of gotten a dim view of how they do their jobs. Obviously, some people in some professions don't maybe understand or have the issues or understand maybe some of the issues where people come from. And that has created many protests across the world, especially what you see in the U.S., and is calling for an end of racial injustice and demanding that governments take the consideration of minorities into account when making policy decisions and drafting legislation, Mr. Speaker. Many of PEI here were very supportive of the recent protests that were calling on government to change the way they do things and attend what was attended here in June this year. Observers thought it was actually some of the largest demonstrations in island history, Mr. Speaker. While many may think of racial or cultural inequality in terms of personal interactions or individual acts of discrimination, in many situations, the struggles minorities experience can be rooted actually in government policy, whether it's healthcare, education, administration, or justice or housing, Mr. Speaker. In June this year, the mover of this particular motion, my colleague from Charlottetown West Royalty, tabled a petition in the House on behalf of Black Cultural Society, which had over 2,000 signatures. The petition called for a review of legislation and policies while applying a racially focused lens. While government and the Premier spoke certainly in favour of this petition, while we are still awaiting any results or actions that have come from that particular review, we know that Cabinet makes decisions for various reasons. I've sat there, we've certainly made decisions. Now we're going to try to focus a lot of decision making on climate change in this province. We certainly, in my time, it was very fiscally oriented, so we tended to look at a lot of issues around from a financial perspective and how it would possibly be ways that we could save money, grow our economy, and take those monies and reinvest it back into programs from a social perspective to help islanders cope with the challenges that they're facing. But we certainly have never really heard of the concept of governments implementing a racial or cultural lens when it comes to decision-making and policy development in this particular province, Mr. Speaker. And while I certainly would never doubt the sincerity of government to say that they will address this particular issue, there are many who feel that the time of commitments and pledges have passed, and really now it's time to put together some concrete action that makes a difference, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to issues that affect everyday islanders' lives, especially those that are in minority situations, Mr. Speaker. So that being said, I certainly am calling on government to expedite the review of legislation and policies while applying this racial or cultural lens. Furthermore, I call on government to be very transparent and publicly release the results of that review so that we can see for themselves, for ourselves, what has been done on this particular important issue. I certainly want to wish Cabinet, certainly begin applying this racial and cultural lens to the decision-making process, so to ensure that minorities are not discriminated against in laws and policies that government may implement in future. I'm certainly not suggesting the laws are currently developed or any intent to discriminate, simply saying we should examine how we could, these impacts of these decisions could impact upon minorities in our province, Mr. Speaker, the same way we do when it comes to climate change or other financial issues. I certainly look forward to seeing what government action will be taking on this particular issue, and I certainly look forward to hearing from many members. But before I cede the chair here, Mr. Speaker, I certainly want to identify a few people in my life that have been very influential and have enlightened me, from a person who comes from Freeland, and you have Scottish and English and Irish heritage, just to have a better sense of what that all, how that all encompassed. But the member from Charlottetown West Royal, he mentioned a few of them already, but Scott Parsons was one of extremely accomplished musician, and everybody knows I tend to be a bit of a fan of the guitar, listening to the guitar, not so much playing it, but I had a good time with Scott. I used to organize the PEI Guitar Festival here in the province, and Scott, I think, just had recently released a CD, and I had contacted him to be the headliner at one of the year's PEI Guitar Festivals. And Scott was a very engaging guy, very talented musician. I still remember him playing, I think it was one of Led Zeppelin's Over the Hills and Far Away at the Tyne Valley Britannia Hall. As a highlight, as I recall. But Scott was so behind the scenes, backstage. So the Guitar Festival was always focused around trying to have all calibers of musicians, all genres of guitar music. And Scott would be backstage with some of the younger performers who just maybe played for the first time. And it wasn't anything about his skin, the type of clothes he wore, or his hair, or anything like that. It was how he played the guitar, how intense he could be at it, and how he could convey that to these young performers. And many of those young performers that played on that particular stage at that guitar festival might have been playing for the first or second time, even in public, and have gone on. I think of Peter Ken that was with the Grass Mountain Hobos, and how he got his confidence in playing the guitar at the PEI Guitar Festival. But Scott Parsons played a key role in that, and I certainly want to thank him for that. Basically, my physician growing up, Mr. Speaker, and well into my adult life, Dr. Matigani, Dr. Joyce Matigani, was the physician for pretty well all my adult life till she passed away. And she came from Rhodesia at that time, was called Zimbabwe today, and as a young boy, you'd go in and she'd do whatever she had to do, examine you, all the checkups and all these types of things. And once again, never looked at her about the color of her skin or anything of that nature. It was how she could deal with the healing powers of her abilities to help me with whatever ailed me or whatever. And a fantastic person, really almost dedicated her complete life to the Tyne Valley area. And I'm sure she did pretty well in the community, and they respected her so much, and it was quite an outpouring of grief when she passed away. Another person that I remember a lot more growing up was a fellow by the name of John Andrew Francis, and his son actually is Senator Brian Francis. And John Andrew used to be at our place quite a bit. He was a pole captain for my dad. And of course, I'd be 15, 16 years old. And John Andrew Francis was a very accomplished boxer. And he had a pretty good set of mitts on him and knuckles. But he was in his later years at that time. And you'd see, some arthritis would come in. But I was always amazed and fascinated when I'd talk with him. And his big fists and things of that nature. But once again, he'd be coming to see my dad, and he'd maybe come a bit early, because once again, Dad would get home around maybe 6:30, something like that, and he might come in about 6 o'clock, and Mom would have him some tea, and have a great conversation about some of the issues about Lennox Island and boxing, and how he kind of wrestle around a bit with you and stuff like that. So I always had a great admiration for him. And Madeline Sark that I just mentioned, Madeline and I really became more, accomplished a little more recently when she became elected to the Lennox Island Band Council. And once again, we communicate quite a bit. A fantastic lady, great advocate for her community. You know, she's just a fantastic advocate for issues around cultural sensitivity and economic growth in her community, and I think I see great things coming from her. And I think the final person I want to mention is actually the member from Charlottetown West Royalty. I had the opportunity to sit next to him in this legislature under a previous sitting. COVID has kind of separated us a little bit more, and I sometimes refer to him as my underling. We're trying to bring him along here as an accomplished legislator in this province. And he certainly seems to be embracing the position. I was quite honored. I had asked him actually to be the guest speaker at my fundraising dinner here a few weeks ago, and he came up, did a great job. And I guess the other thing was that I had constituents actually come over and had mentioned he was one of the best speakers we've had here. He really knows what he's talking about, and he talked a little bit about bringing some of this issues of this motion that he was bringing forward and explained it out to the constituents in my particular riding. And so for that, I thank you very much. So for that, Mr. Speaker, I'm quite honored to second this particular motion and look forward to future comments from other members of this legislature. Thank you.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm proud to support this motion, and I want to thank the member from Charlottetown West Royalty for bringing it forward. Dr. Morrison has declared racism as a public health issue. Racialized communities often experience worse health outcomes. For example, we know that across the world, COVID has had greater impacts on racialized communities. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to highlight recent concerns raised by the UPEI Student Union and international students about a policy change related to PEI health cards. And when I read this motion, it made me reflect back on this issue that I had just read recently in the news, and probably many of us read it. These policy changes by Health PEI have made it more cumbersome for international students to get a health card. So international students now have to apply annually, so every year, to keep their health card, rather than tying the life of the health card to the study permit that they are here under. So it makes it very difficult. And you know, we have to note that a significant number of international students are racialized, meaning this change disproportionately harms racialized students. The change in policy, as reported by the CBC, is contributing also to longer delays in getting health cards out to all islanders. So we're not only harming international students with this policy, we are harming everyone seeking to get a health card. So I think there's a principle in equity work, that policies and programs that are good for marginalized communities are good for everyone. And this is exactly why bringing in diverse perspectives is important. It's not just a nice thing to say, it's an effective approach to improving public policy outcomes. And I look forward to making sure that this government is taking into account diverse approaches and racially aware approaches as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure for me to rise to speak to this motion, and I would give great props to my colleague across from Charlottetown West Royalty and those who have spoke to this for bringing it forward. I had a meeting in early September with the Black Cultural Society, their executive, and I started that meeting and the Minister of Tourism, Economic Growth and Culture was there. And I quite honestly said how challenging it is, or at least how I felt for me to be speaking to this as a white, I guess, middle-aged, heterosexual male, and how I feel a little bit cautious, I guess, to actually broach these topics that need to be broached. And it's not that I feel uncomfortable. I think there's so much unknown around it for me. And when I talked with Tamara Steele and those, the fact that the Premier of PEI feels that tells me that others across Prince Edward Island feel that to some degree, and that's a great indicator of why we need to continue to move forward in this regard. And Tamara did say to me, and she said, it doesn't matter the color of your skin, you're in a position to help to drive this forward, and I would much prefer to judge you on how you move this forward as opposed to how you feel about us addressing this with you. And it was a good conversation. It was a fulsome conversation, and I tried to indicate there, as I have in the past, that we're there to help, and we have, and I will outline a couple of initiatives that we have responded to quickly in a few moments. I would just want to reflect just a little bit. There are two, I think, somewhat defining moments within my own life personally where this has become, or the world has opened to me, or I have opened my eyes to the world, Mr. Speaker. You only have to look at the last number of years, 20 years, and how the face of Prince Edward Island has changed through our population increase and growth. The diversity that it has brought has not just made our province bigger, it's not just made our province more economically strong and socially strong. I think it's made us better, and I think to anyone in Prince Edward Island would reflect that, and I think that that's a great success story initially that we have seen that growth. When my oldest son Jake was about 4, I took him, we lived in Sherbrooke at the time, and we took him to Rainbow Daycare on Duke Street, I'll never forget. And we walked in, and there was a new young student there, I'd say about the same age as Jake that day. Beautiful, she had a lovely pink dress on, I can picture it yet, and she was black. And our Jake, who is probably the most kind, loving person you could ever meet, walked over to this and looked up and down and reached over and touched her on the cheek. And once he realized that she was the same as he was, they hit it off and were kind of boyfriend and girlfriend for about 6 months in the Rainbow Daycare. But it taught me, that what he saw visually and what he felt immediately afterwards, just upon his own investigation, upon wanting to learn, wanting to understand, it showed me that, the color of our skin shouldn't determine how we're treated. It shouldn't determine anything other than just how proud we are of our own heritage. The other defining moment was when I worked for the Mi'kmaq Confederacy. This was around the events were leading up to 2014, which was the 150th celebration of the Charlottetown Conference, and one of the proposals that had come forward that the Confederacy, through the Department of Communications at the time that I was in charge of, was the federal government had talked at that time about wanting to reenact the arrival of the Fathers of Confederation. And so at that time in 1864, that was male, Christian, white arrival. And so you could imagine me in a room with many prominent Mi'kmaq elders and women. And Julie Pelletier-Lush, who is now our poet laureate, said, the plaque in the legislature says we build it better than we knew. Why don't we focus on what they built it, as opposed to reliving what we did? And I thought that was amazingly brilliant and probably important with this resolution to, it's easy to look back and pick out all of the mistakes that we have made until today. It would be catastrophic for all of us to continue to make those mistakes going forward. And that is why we have committed to trying to change the way we do things as a government. And to put a gender lens is important, to put a diversity lens, to put an environmental lens, and all of these issues are so critically important to how the success of this country, this province will grow going forward. And the immediate response from a lot of people who have been around government for a long time tends to always be, Mr. Speaker, that it makes it a little bit harder to get things done. And it's only harder because it's different. And I think if we continue to make it the practice of this is how we do these things every day, then it's no longer hard. It actually just becomes part of the day-to-day operations of how we do things. And that is where we need to get to. I think we've made some initial strides here. I also talked to Tamara about a plaque at the bog. But I honestly said, I don't want to be a white male premier telling you what you should put at the bog. But we have committed to providing some funding and whatever assistance we need for the community to come together to present some kind of proper, whether it's a monument, a statue, a plaque, or a combination of all of those things. And we have committed to actually providing the funding to get that done. But I think it needs to come from the Black Culture Society, from that community, from those ancestors, or those people whose ancestors were lived there. And so that is what we've committed to in terms of that. We've also committed to operational funding for the Black Cultural Society. For the calendar year we're in, or the fiscal year we're in now, we've committed $35,000, and then we'll commit a further $41,000, in lieu of office space, which is important. They really wanted to. The society really wants to get a foothold in, and they feel that leadership role that they can provide, that assistance they can provide to government will be invaluable as we move forward. And so we also, we have put together, and I articulated this, Honourable Member, in a letter to you. You had written me a letter, and it's on its way to you. It's probably on your desk. And I'm sorry it's dated November 18th, but I'll change the date to 19th in case you didn't get it until today. But we also talk about, we're in the process of finalizing a position that will work within Executive Council that will assume the title of Anti-Racism Policy Consultant, Mr. Speaker. And what I asked the executive of the Black Culture Society to do was, why don't you help us develop the job description? I know what we need to do from a government perspective, but tell me what we need to do from your perspective so we can come up with something that actually works, Mr. Speaker. And so that's something that I'm really excited about as well. And that position will have a direct line. It will be at the senior levels of Executive Council, have a direct line within all departments, Mr. Speaker. We also talk about the formulation of an anti-racism table, Mr. Speaker. So we're finalizing the terms of reference with that, with the Black Culture Society, Mr. Speaker. And look, it's an initial first start, but it is just that, Mr. Speaker. I think we need to continue to push ourselves in here to do better. Although we have some conversations during question period, I know the opposition members in this House are the same as the government members of this House. And when you push government to do things that need to be done, Islanders win in the end, Mr. Speaker. That's the job we have in here. We talk about it a million times. Whoever gets the credit for it, I don't think it matters to Islanders. If we can leave this place a little bit better than we found it, Mr. Speaker, then I think we could all take a little bit of a bow, and that's the job we have here. And I just want to continue to remain committed, Mr. Speaker, to working with all of my colleagues, all of those across Prince Edward Island, to do what we can to make this province the best place to live, work, and raise a family, Mr. Speaker. So I congratulate the Honourable Member for a wonderful resolution, and keep up the good work.
Honourable Premier, you are adjourning debate.
Am I? Yes. Mr. Speaker, I am adjourning debate.
Honourable members, debate has been adjourned. Shall it carry? Carry. The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere and the Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I call motion 101 be now read.
Shall it carry?
Motion 101. The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere moves, seconded by the Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford, the following motion. Whereas housing availability and affordability is a critical part of provincial economic strength, growth, and recovery, and whereas the PEI Consumer Price Index for September 2020 shows that rental costs have increased by 12.1% year over year, and whereas house purchase prices have doubled in the last 5 years and increased 20% in the most recent year, and whereas mobile rental vouchers are a band-aid solution to unaffordability and do not increase housing capacity, and whereas unregulated short-term rentals have adversely affected the rental and housing market, especially for low and middle-income tenants, first-time home buyers, and young families, and whereas the province has experienced the exceptionally low vacancy rate for the past 3 years, and whereas unavailability of housing makes it more difficult to recruit skilled workers to PEI, including newcomers and healthcare professionals, And whereas rising housing costs reduced islanders' disposable income and consequently their ability to participate fully in the economy, therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to make significant immediate and long-term investment in public housing, including cooperative, supportive housing, seniors and family housing, through all available opportunities and partnerships. Therefore be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to take all possible steps to improve and enforce municipal and provincial short-term rental regulations and return housing stock to the long-term market. Therefore, be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to consider taxation policy measures to cool down the housing market. Therefore, be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to promote better collaboration and communication between the Department of Social Development and Housing and the Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture to ensure that housing is addressed in a holistic way. Therefore, be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to implement and report on clearer performance indicators for the PEI Housing Action Plan and housing initiatives generally.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere, the opposition House Leader, to start debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today to speak to this motion. Obviously, it's a comprehensive one that addresses a range of issues, and I am not the only member who is able to or willing to speak to this from this side of the House. However, I would like to begin with an overview of some of the key facts that really matter when we come to speaking about the housing crisis here in PEI. The opening clause for this motion speaks about housing availability and affordability as a critical part of the provincial economic strength, growth, and recovery. As we spoke about this morning, this is not a new crisis. It is a result of a number of complex factors that have occurred over a number of years, and are as much a result of inaction as action, and therefore the responses and the actions that we need to take as government are also complex, but they do not get any easier the longer we leave them, Mr. Speaker. This crisis is a result of a rapid population increase, slow and expensive construction builds, upticks in long-term rentals being switched to short-term Airbnbs, job precarity, both pre- and post-COVID, low wages, low vacancy rates, and minimal incentives or intervention from either the province or municipalities to provide legislation that supports tenants as well as landlords. We are now in the unenviable position of being comparable in rental rates to large municipalities like Vancouver and Toronto, Montreal. We are also the lowest vacancy rate for the third year running in the country, comparable to spaces, again, like Toronto, Vancouver, and even the North. Our prices for rentals are some of the highest in the country, and we are no longer the low cost of living destination of choice. Those Atlantic lottery ads that used to say, what could you do with $1 million in Toronto? You could buy a condo with a little platform and have a potted plant on it, but here you could buy the whole estate. Well, those two things are getting a little bit closer together, Mr. Speaker, and I don't know if that's necessarily what we all thought we were signing up for. The government, both previous and current, were reluctant and have been reluctant to even acknowledge or let alone act on the housing crisis. It's important that we use words that actually reflect the reality. And when we talk about those core housing needs, these are not things that only apply to people who are poor. We overemphasize the need and the gap, not because it doesn't matter, and absolutely does, but there seems to be a very strong narrative that this only sits in one space. This only sits in people who are the lowest income, who are on social assistance, who are unable to change their circumstances, who don't seem to be able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But, Mr. Speaker, this is actually impacting everybody. This is impacting regular working families. This is impacting people who are sitting in this house. This is impacting people that we know. It's impacting our communities. It's impacting our parents. It's impacting the people who thought that they were going to be okay when they grew up and they could afford to buy a house, or are having to change and shift their circumstances as their parents need to downsize their homes, or who are having to deal with what happens when you go to think that you want to move to a bigger home and you find that you can't because there isn't one that you can afford. Mr. Speaker, in my own area, in Parkdale, in what's one of the older subdivisions in Charlottetown, regular ranchers that previously went on the market for about $150,000 a year, which is, an affordable mortgage rate for a new family starting out, are now tipping the market at just under $300,000. Some of them are going for more than that, and they're going in less than 4 days. And actually, for a regular family earning a regular minimum wage, they cannot actually get a mortgage for that amount. They are out of the housing market before they've even started. So, Mr. Speaker, this is something that, despite some of what we hear from the other side of the House, we're not actually making it up. Islanders aren't making this up. In fact, it reminds me, when I first came to this House, I had quite a few spicy exchanges with the then Minister of what was Family Services. And in the fall of 2018, that minister actually had to make a formal apology for calling me a liar in the House, Mr. Speaker, because I talked about the homeless people that I was meeting with who were sleeping in tents. You might remember it. It was quite a shouty day. So I would go out in the morning and go and visit the tent encampment where people, at this point, this was November, it was snowing, and I would drop off supplies, socks, warm clothes, food, and check in with people, make sure they were kind of connecting with their support workers. And then I came into the House and I talked about it in here, Mr. Speaker. And I recognize that not everybody maybe does that on a daily basis. I get that, we don't all move in the same circles, but the fact that the government at that time and the representative for housing at that time in government was so unable to accept that that was actually a reality for Islanders was in itself a shock. Now, I'm happy to say that eventually we got past that, and within a few weeks or even a few days, we were able to see the establishment of temporary emergency housing shelters. In fact, that's the first time that the government rented motel rooms to put people up in the winter. And, Mr. Speaker, that probably saved somebody's life. We do not want to be the kind of place that makes the news because somebody who is homeless or housing insecure has frozen to death on their way from one shelter to another. But, Mr. Speaker, that's the kind of reality that we're talking about in here, and it's really hard for people who come from a space of privilege like we do, and we can get in a car and go home and get in a house and have a warm bed to sleep in. It's really hard sometimes for us to recognize that that is also the reality of life in PEI. But those two spaces are getting closer and closer together. Mr. Speaker, now we have families who are unable to find affordable, consistent housing. They're kicked out of the housing that they're in April to make way for summer tenants, and they go and spend the summer camping in an RV or tents and hope to God that they're going to be able to find an apartment again in the fall so they can put their kids back in school. In fact, I've had families who have contacted our office and told us that they are sending their kids to school. They're having to lie about where they're living because they're hoping that they're going to get an apartment before it snows or anybody finds out that they're actually in Cavendish. Mr. Speaker, the stories that we hear consistently from Islanders are not just the stories of people who have never had a job, who are relying on rent supplements, who are these imaginary people who live on welfare and never do anything else. Mr. Speaker, these are the stories of families who do not have an extra $10 in their pocket. It's the more month than money. And when your rent goes up from $800 a month to $1,200 a month, you have to take that money from somewhere. You take it from the food that you buy from your family, from the clothes that you buy from your kids, from the gas that you can put in the car, from the heat that you can afford, from the basic things that we take for granted. This is the reality of the housing crisis in PEI. It's shameful. It's embarrassing for the people who are in it, and it's shameful for us as legislators that we have such a hard time acknowledging and talking about this. We are getting these calls. I know that everyone in this House is getting them. If you're not listening to them, then you are not listening. And Mr. Speaker, I am really hoping that we can, after a challenging conversation like we've had today and in previous days, that we can move past that and to the point where we start talking about the actions that we're going to take as a collective, as a group, to actually address housing across the continuum for all Islanders.
Call the hour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll adjourn debate.
The hour has been called. Honorable members, we'll recess until 7 o'clock this evening.